about things and diseases and stuff like that. So I enjoy when someone will do that, like these long, like every now and then someone will use it in a novel way. I really like that. But there's a lot of it is just people just trying to get a reaction, and what's the reaction they can get by pissing you off.
Well, they also might be the ones that are most we don't exactly know what motivates people to respond on Twitter, and it might be that the fundamental motivation for a Twitter response is anger.
Yeah.
Rather than the desire to share something, because we don't know anything about how these new communication techniques function psychologically. Right. Like maybe Twitter is skewed 90% towards people who are impulsively angry at that moment. It could easily be. We don't know. Like, if you're driving in your car and someone cuts you off, you curse, or at least I do. And it's often a situational issue rather than a personality flaw on the part of the other driver, even though it's easy to assume that. But you respond impulsively. I mean, God only knows how much of our social media networks are set up to differentially reward impulsive behavior. And it's also not that easy to hold people accountable in some sense. And maybe there's some utility to that. But with anonymous accounts and all of that, the anonymity is also problematic, because it certainly enables people to allow their worst to manifest themselves, especially if they're resentful and angry. So
the only benefit that I can see to anonymity is it gives you the opportunity to explore controversial ideas without blowback. True. If it's used correctly.
Well, that's it. I think that's true. I think there's some utility. I mean, I don't think that it should be forbidden, but like most things, it has its advantages and its disadvantages.
Yeah, like most things. It's not entirely negative to be anonymous.
Hey, so I figured something out that I thought I'd tell you about. This took me like 30 years to figure out, and I figured it out on this tour. So there's this old idea, that you have to rescue your father from the belly of the whale, right? From some monster that's deep in the abyss. You see that in Pinocchio, for example. But it's a very common idea. And I figured out why that is, I think. So imagine that we already know from a clinical perspective that, if you set out a path towards a goal, which you want to do because you need a goal and you need a path, because that provides you with positive emotion, right? So you set up something as valuable, so that implies a hierarchy. You set up something as valuable. You decide that you're going to do that instead of other things, so that's kind of a sacrifice, because you're sacrificing everything else to pursue that. And then you experience a fair bit of positive emotion and meaning as you watch yourself move towards the goal. And so the implication of that is that the better the goal, the more full and rich your experience is going to be when you pursue it. So that's one of the reasons that's one of the reasons for developing a vision and for fleshing yourself out philosophically, because you want to aim at the highest goal that you can manage. Okay, so you do that, and then what you'll find is that as you move towards the goal, there are certain things that you have to accomplish that frighten you. Maybe you have to learn to be a better speaker, a better writer, a better thinker, or you have to be better to people around you, or you have to learn some new skills and you're afraid of that. Whatever, because it's going to stretch you if you pursue a goal, and so that'll put you up against challenges. Okay, so all the clinical data indicates, the opposite of safe spaces, as Jonathan Haidt has been pointing out, that what you want to do when you identify something that someone is avoiding that they need to do because they're afraid, you have them voluntarily confront it. And so you break it down. What you try to do, if you're a behavior therapist, is you break down the thing they're avoiding into smaller and smaller pieces until you find a piece that's small enough so they'll do it. And it doesn't really matter as long as they start it. Then they can put the next piece on and the next piece. And what happens is they don't get less afraid exactly. They get braver. It's like there's more of them. And here's why. So imagine you do something new, and that's informative. Right? There's information in the action, and then you can incorporate that information and turn it into a skill and turn it into a transformation of your perceptions. So there's more to you because you've tried something new. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, there's good biological evidence for this now, that if you put yourself in a new situation, then new genes code for new proteins and build new neural structures and new nervous system structures. Same thing happens to some degree when you work out, right? Because your muscles are responding to the load. But your nervous system does that too. So you imagine that there's a lot of potential you locked in your genetic code. And then if you put yourself in a new situation, then the stress, that's the situational stress that's produced by that particular situation, unlocks those genes and then builds new parts of you. And so that's very cool, because who knows how much there is locked inside of you. Okay, so now here's the idea. So let's assume that scales as you take on heavier and heavier loads. That more and more of you get more and more informed because you're doing more and more difficult things, but more and more of you gets unlocked. And so then what that would imply is that if you got to the point where you could look at the darkest things, so that would be the abyss, right? That would be the deepest abyss. If you could look at the harshest things, like the most brutal parts of the suffering of the world and the malevolence of people and society, if you could look at that straight and directly, that would turn you on maximally. And so that's the idea of rescuing your father, because imagine that you're like the potential composite of all the ancestral wisdom that's locked inside of you biologically. But that's not going to come out at all unless you stress yourself, unless you challenge yourself. And the bigger the challenge you take on, the more that's going to turn on. And so that as you take on a broader and broader range of challenges and you push yourself harder, then more and more of what you could be turns on, and that's equivalent to transforming yourself into the ancestral father. Because you're like what would you call it? You're the consequence of all these living beings that have come before you. And that's all part of your biological potentiality. And then if you can push yourself, then all of that clicks on. And that turns you into who you could be. That's the re-representation of that positive ancestral father. So that's why you rescue your father from the belly of the beast.
So you think that this ultimate goal of sacrifice and of risking your life in order to save someone who's truly important to you, that this somehow or another maximizes your potential as a human being?
Well, I think you can think about it religiously too. So think about it this way. So in the Christian story, for example, you have Christ does two things that are messianic. One is takes the suffering of the world onto himself. Okay, so that's a weird idea. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's think about it psychologically. Well, maybe it means that, that's your job. The world's full of suffering, and you should accept that as your responsibility. Past, present, and future. You're supposed to do something about that, as much as you can about it. And maybe you start with your own localized suffering, put yourself together, but then you expand that outward and you decide that you're not a victim of that, even though, you're part and parcel of it, but you're the potential solution to that. And so you accept that as a responsibility. So that's part of taking on a load. That's part of bearing a cross. You could look at it that way. The cross is sort of a symbol of the place of maximal suffering. Okay, so you accept that as a challenge, not as something that you're victimized by. Maybe you accept that as the price of being. Okay, so that's one responsibility. You're responsible for addressing the suffering in the world. So that could give you some meaning, seems to me. And then the next thing is, there's a story, of course, that Christ met the devil in the desert. And so that's the encounter with malevolence. So that would be the other thing, because the two major problems that people face, obviously, are suffering, tragedy, and malevolence. And so that's the other thing that you're responsible for, is that you're supposed to look at the capacity for human evil as clearly as you possibly can, which is a very terrifying thing. That causes post-traumatic stress disorder in people that aren't accustomed to it. And in the mythology that's associated with the encounter with evil, it's almost always the case that the entity that does the encountering, even if it does it voluntarily, is hurt by it. So the Egyptian god Horus, for example, who's the eye and the falcon, the thing that can see and pay attention, when he encounters his evil uncle, Seth, who's the precursor of Satan, he loses an eye. Because it's no joke to encounter malevolence. It can really shake you. But the idea would be that if you can face the malevolence and you can face the suffering, then that opens the door to your maximal potential. And then the optimistic part of that is, and this is why it's so useful to peer into the darkness, let's say. The optimistic part of that is that although the suffering is great and the malevolence is deep, your capacity to transcend it is stronger. So what you get out of the most negative viewpoint is the most positive possible consequence. Because one of the things you'd like to know, if you wanted to know something deep about yourself, is that you could face the worst that there was and prevail. And I believe that people are capable of that. I think that despite how tragic life is and how malevolent things are, that fundamentally our spirit, let's say, has the capacity to confront that and to fix it, like psychologically, so to confront it courageously, to be able to bear up under that if you do it voluntarily, but also to address it. Not only to deal with it psychologically, but to deal with it practically. And that we could make things much better.
There's always a striving towards utopia, right? Like this is the ultimate goal, that if you ask people, what would you like out of civilization? Well, I'd like everyone to be happy and everyone to get along and there to be no war, nothing, no suffering, no anything. But in order to really, truly learn about yourself and about life, you have to overcome adversity. You have to experience things. And I firmly believe that in order to truly appreciate love, you have to understand and really have felt hate. And
hey, what's going on, everybody? This is the Ceremonial Witch, and I'm trying to deliver on my promise. Initially my last video, when I did the whole turkey Thanksgiving shit video there, which I believe in, by the way. But when I did that video, I said I'd try to put something on Monday because I have Monday off. But today I go and work for the afternoon shift there at 2:30, so, by 2 I gotta be out of here, so that means by 1 I gotta put this on, hopefully But anyways, you don't need to know all that shit. What the fuck am I telling you that for? What's going on? Okay, so I put a couple videos on today on Instagram and my YouTube, same videos, 2 of them. One was talking about a notification that I looked at fast last night when I was half asleep. So this morning when I made the first video, it was mainly about what I was going to talk about today, and I was going to be going live. And I spoke about the notification saying I couldn't remember the info, but that it has something to do with probably censorship, or trying to, if you don't follow policy, that you might get the boot, or, they don't have to pay you or something like that. And then it prompted me to read it. So then I made a video of me reading it, but I didn't put that on. And then I made another video stating that, the first page, the first couple lines, like if you know anything about journalism or, advertising, just in your newspaper, your headline has to hit home. If you have a picture, you want that to be a great picture as well, but your headline should hit home, and your first paragraph is supposed to intrigue and pull in, you're going to have the most important facts at the top, and then they get less important as you go towards the bottom. So that's what the video was about today. That's what I was talking about in the second video I posted, was the fact that, I don't think it actually is a censorship plot or anything like that from Spreaker. However, there was many little subtitles, things written in yellow that if you clicked on, it brought you to a different page, a particular different policy. So, who knows, right? I didn't read it all. But going by the couple of lines I read, that said something to the effect that they want to be in coherence, which is, I'm paraphrasing, that's not exactly what they said, but they wanted to be following the guidelines of podcasts and the policies, and something to that effect saying was what they were saying. So just with those two things, if you're not following, if you're not saying the right things, or following the guidelines, anything to that effect, then yeah, there's a good chance they could either not promote that video, not let you publish your podcast, or whatever the case may be. So that's what the second video was about. But mainly today, my last video, I said I wanted to talk about Dark Night of the Soul or shadow work. Get more in depth on different things you can or cannot do. And once again, when I get into that, don't think what I'm saying is exactly what you have to do for your Dark Night of the Soul, because this is going to be different for everybody. I'm actually videotaping myself at the same time as I record this on my phone. And I'll put it on Spreaker after, and maybe I'll put it on YouTube. I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, depending if you can hear me or not, because the mic's plugged into my phone and not into the computer. But anyways, so point is, the Dark Night of the Soul is one of the things I said I was going to talk about, and Divination is the second thing I want to talk about. And I will. But first I want to talk about something else, okay? And magic. What is magic? Well, magic is, paraphrasing, so, Crowley, don't hate me for this, but, Magic is the art of changing, conforming reality with your will. Something to that effect is the definition of magic that most people use, right? And then I, early on, like 1 to 10 number of episodes, one of those episodes from 1 to 10 of my ceremony witchcraft, the ones you can barely hear, there's a couple, they peak and spike. I bought software to lift that up. I didn't buy it yet, sorry, but I have the free version of the software and it works great, but then it's not supported. The file that it turns into is not supported by Spreaker or wherever I go try to put it, so I'm going to have to figure that out. But anyways, I said that, that definition is, Frater says that definition is not accurate at the same time. It's misleading and accurate at the same time, because then he talks about your will to go make a turkey sandwich, and he doesn't have to go to his temple and wish for a turkey sandwich. And you would say, okay, that's not magic. And he says, but that is magic, because everything you do is magic, right? Everything first starts with a thought. I want a turkey sandwich. Well, you can go do that yourself, right? But anyways, you've manifested everything you need to have that turkey sandwich, right? You manifested the job that paid for the money for the fridge, the mayo, or mustard and bread, turkey, whatever you want. Fucking turkeys again. Why am I talking about turkeys? Cocksucker. But anyways, but I went and said that magic should be the term used for someone who is actively attempting, trying, maybe not even successfully, but they are started, an initiation or whatever, and they know that their subconscious mind is what creates the reality around them. So the point I tried to make and stress was that if you are doing magic, then magic, the definition of magic, should be someone who is no longer at the whims of the programming that's been put into their subconscious and the TVs and all the things that continue to program, reprogram, and shit like that to your subconscious, okay? Someone who's doing magic is actually trying to affect that subconscious mind, which is implied in Crowley's definition. Magic is, conforming your reality to your using your will or something like that, which is what he's implying, right? He's actually saying magic is when you do this on purpose, and versus, life itself and people just going through life, it's just magic is happening because the same thing is happening. Whatever was put into your head, whatever programming was put there, and it is happening. It is being worked out. It's playing out in your life. Therefore, everybody's doing magic, and I think that was Frater Xavier. That was Frater Xavier's issue, I think, with that definition. But anyways, so magic, is whenever you are attempting to do it on purpose to change your life, reprogram. And the reason you have to go through this transformation process is because you have to transform, you have to reprogram, you have to depolarize, you have to do all these things to realize that what you were told, what you believe, everything that, up until this point that you believe is real or not real, and principles and your morals and all this was someone else's idea implanted into you. Now, some of those things can be good and still beneficial to you. However, some of those cannot be. And if there is some bad programming, such as, maybe a religious programming, and I'm not saying religion is good or bad, because I have mixed emotions about religion. I think maybe religion in the beginning was good, and it now has been used against us in some way, shape, or form, that, just because someone decided to take Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or any of the religions and decided to use it as a dogma and a doctrine and indoctrinate everybody, all right? Just because someone decided to do that doesn't mean the knowledge in the book is bad or good, or, you throw the whole book baby out with the bathwater kind of situation once again. I don't believe that's what anybody should do. And once again, I believe that not Christianity probably, and some of these mainstream religions, but I'll just use Christianity. I don't believe that it was created to control people. However, what I believe and know or think about the past, like Romans had Saturnalia, right? But this is before Christmas became known as Christmas. It was called Saturnalia. I talked about Marilyn Manson has a song Saturnalia, and that was going to be my segue maybe into the dark side later. But point is, Saturnalia, right? The Romans believed in Saturn. They knew Saturn. They had to worship Saturn. They had to give Saturn a fucking day. Saturn was that important, okay? but Roman Catholic, right? So they had a religion for the people to be indoctrinated in, so they were good little sheep, so they followed along, so they listened, right? Blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying the Bible and the stories in the Bible are real or fake, but going by our history books, and if you can believe our history books are real, or the knowledge we have about Saturnalia, Saturn, and the Roman history, which, the Romans burned all the other books, and then now we have their books, so can't really go by much else, and kind of puts up some red flags saying, is this really real? But anyways, going by that, the Romans believed in astrology. They knew that the stars were important to us, right? Going by that. And on Saturnalia, they actually switched roles. If they had slaves and people that worked for them in their house, well, the Roman, whatever, it was the emperor or just, some high-class Roman motherfuckers, whatever, part of the democracy, part of the republic, whatever they are, they would switch roles. They would let their slaves rule their shit for the day, and the only rule was that they couldn't kill them or do anything like really, really harmful to them, like cut them, make them bleed, almost like torture them and shit like that. But they were allowed to do some forms of torture to them, put in the street, ride them around, make them fuck each other, whatever the case was, something to that effect. This is what's in the books, okay? So I'm not saying it's real or fake, I'm just telling you this is what's in the books. And when you know about Saturn is your limitations, and he's the restrictor, he's father time, and Saturn is exalted in Libra, which is the scales, which is, Libra is, the scales of life, right? So therefore, when they do this, they're trying to appease Saturn. They say, okay, I treat this person like shit, but at least I give them the chance to treat me like shit. And by me treating them like shit, I'm imposing restrictions on them for them to overcome maybe eventually, blah, 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 blah. So that's how they try to deal with the whole karma thing, which may or may not be accurate, which may or may not be great, and it may not even be, it might be a big exaggeration of what they did. But that's what they did. And the whole reason I went through that whole spiel was just to say that there's always probably been, if you can believe the books, but if you look at our society today, we have that society where we have these mainstream religions for the masses, and if our leaders really believed in the principles of these mainstream religions, then it would be hard to believe that our society would be the way it is today. If people actually believe in the message of Christ, these are our leaders, then why are things done the way they're done? And I'm not saying it's all bad, because there's a lot of great things. I mean, poverty rates have went down, and it's expected to be by, I think, 2030, we have no poverty, and that's predicated and going by, I think the scale was something like almost $2 a day. To live on $2 a day is poverty, okay? So by 2030, everybody will have at least $2 a day across the entire world, anybody who's impoverished, right? And, technically speaking, I've had and probably still have days where I don't have a dime until payday, but then if you take when I get my pay and you divide it by the amount of days, then it tells you how much money I make per day. So if you take $2 times it by 365 days in a year, well, that'll give you the number of what absolute poverty is, basically. And what is that? Well, $2 and 365 times 2 is $730. So $730 a year. Now, that's not that fucking much. That's not that fucking much. If that's the right stats and everything I said was accurate, that's not that fucking much. However, it's something. If you go to countries where the peso, right? I don't know what it is now. And I know I've been to Cuba, and they had two different currencies. All right, they had one that was just a currency, and then they had the one they traded with my Canadian money or American money that I used. So it's kind of confusing. But if you go to the peso, wasn't even quite a penny. Now, we don't even have a penny anymore here in Canada. We got rid of the penny. So the smallest piece of money you can have is a nickel, 5 cents, which puts a whole new spin, right? If you don't have pennies, then people can't be living on pennies a day. So if the lowest amount of money you can have is 5 cents, so that means everybody who has a nickel will at least have 5 cents, right? So that kind of brings those stats up. Now, if you get rid of all the nickels, or you know what I mean, if people don't have nickels and they don't have shit, and maybe if they had 4 pennies, and now those aren't even worth anything, you can say, well, that's not a good thing, and whatever. But point is, the peso was worth less than one of my Canadian pennies. However long ago when we had the penny, and however long ago I knew this. I don't know what that's at today, but if you put that into perspective, right? If your peso is like, let's say the peso, and I don't think this is real or true, but let's say the peso is half of a penny, right? So a penny is 1 cent, and a peso is 0.5 of 1 cent, you know, because like my Canadian money isn't worth as much as the American money, right? The $13 I'm about to get paid from Spreaker for this month's stuff actually works out to $17. So, you know, if you do that, and then the euro is worth more than that, you know, or a pound or whatever it's called. So when you put that into perspective like that, it's very likely, right? So if Canadian money, and then you keep going down and people's monies are worth less. Well, if $2 a day, if that's Canadian and or American. If it's American, that's kind of like $4 a day, and that means you have to do 3 point something. But you'd have to do that 3 point something times 300, and that means $1,000, right? But if a peso is worth half a penny, all right? Well, then, if these people are living on $1,000 Canadian, or we'll say Canadian, so we can use the half a penny thing. If $1,000 is what these people, if someone, let's say, whatever, if it's Cuba, this is just hypothetical, this is just an example. If someone in Cuba lives on $1,000 Canadian, but their peso is half a penny, all right? So that means it would take them 200 pennies to make $1, right? So when you put that into pesos, man, I'm having a hard time with this right now. But if you put that into pesos, that means, you know, basically it would be like I would think it would be double. But, you know, that's just off the top of my head. Maybe I'll do the math later in between and actually work it out. But that'd be like $2,000 of their pesos, which would be worth more or something to that effect. Or maybe it's 4 times the amount, whatever. Because, you know, if every dollar to them is 200 pesos, something to that effect, right? 200, or it'd be 100 cents makes $1, right? So 200 pesos would make 1 Canadian dollar, right? So if you go by that math, well, then every dollar is 200 pesos. You take that 200, you times it by the $1,000 you have. Well, 200 times 1,000, that's a whole different number, but you got to go point. You know, anyways. So my math isn't great. I'm sorry. I just woke up and I still haven't had caffeine yet. So fuck all the math shit. But you get the point I'm trying to get at, okay? So the whole poverty line that people argue with to these other countries where, you know, the peso might even be worth more than their money, that amount of money is actually a pretty good chunk of cash. To us, it ain't worth shit. But to us, we're actually in that higher percentile. You know, if you're making, I think it's 30 grand. I think it's 30 grand. I don't know if that's Canadian or American, but 30 grand is considered that 1%. Because there's that many people in the world who don't make 30 grand a year. All right? Now, between me and my wife, we make way more than that. My wife alone makes more than that, okay? And like I said, she's got a governmental job and all that shit, but my wife alone makes that. And it doesn't make any of this shit easy for us, but we got to do what we got to do. That's one of the reasons I got into magic. And one of the reasons I went back to work is, well, I mean, I can keep manifesting and getting shit, and we were financially secure. But the stress I put under my wife before these checks happened was problematic and was brutal, and it stunts my magic. So, for one, by me working and then continuing to do money magic, then I can be able to save a hell of a lot more. I'll be in a better position, and I'll be able to help a hell of a lot more people. And, you know, I can potentially save up for this daycare idea that I want to have just, you know, maybe 3 kids, you know, one with ADD, one with ADHD, and one with autism, you know, and then work with those kids, you know, these kids that have trouble going to daycares and stuff like that, and potentially try to get them a little bit better before school, especially if they're either in the process of being diagnosed or putting on meds, or if their parents don't want them on meds. Well, I'd like to try to work with them if they're too young to do stuff like Kung Fu and, you know, cadets or any one of these, you know, extracurricular activities that teach these kids, you know, discipline, stuff like that. Now, I know there's a big difference between ADHD and autism. So, I got a lot of research, and I'm not going to go through all that right now, but this is kind of like what I want to do. It's one of the ways I want to help, because I can understand those mindsets. I can understand children, at least with ADD and ADHD, being that I still possibly have ADD and live with it. And my parents never put me on medication, but I went through my school life like that, and I was lucky. And when I think back on it, my dad did do rough and tumble play with me, as Jordan Peterson talks about. And if you do that with a kid that shows signs of ADD or ADHD, or you do not do that with a boy, and even girls too, but let's stick with, boys or girls, that, you know, if you don't do that with a boy or a girl, and play with a little bit of rough playing with it, girls are slightly different than boys, then in rats anyways, these rats show signs, the prefrontal cortex is something to that effect, don't get developed correctly. And then they have signs and show symptoms of what people call ADHD or ADD, both of them, depending on the level and the amount that they were or were not subjugated to. So I was lucky my dad did that with me. And it doesn't mean my school was hard, but if I had an understanding teacher who kind of knew how I was, because I finished my homework fast, and then I would disrupt. Now, I wasn't hyperactive and impulsive like my boy, but I would disrupt, and prompted to. I could do some of those things, but I was at a far different level. And I may have not listened to my parents and shit like that, but I was always respectful of my parents, even my father. Well, we've had some things and shit happen as I got older, and, I hit my testosterone, I hit puberty and all that, because then, if you're an aggressive kid and shit like that, ADD, ADHD kind of enhances maybe the aggressiveness because you have problems holding attention. So, and then when people think there's something wrong with you or challenge you or whatever, or, you get a little cocky or you think you're smarter than other people, then, you can come off as a little more aggressive all the time. But they disciplined and or did the right steps, my parents, I think. And, they made me able to enter society pretty well, get good grades, and maintain and not get in too many fights and not too much trouble. But then when my puberty hit, bam, spikes testosterone, and somebody who has ADHD and whatever, and you give them extra testosterone, all that can add to the aggressive. Testosterone is not a bad thing, but it can make bad things if you have certain issues you don't have under control, right? I mean, we know this from people using steroids, extra aggression, and all this, blah, 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 blah. Point is, that would be my goal. So it's a lot easier for me to be able to work on that if I'm just manifesting the amount of money I need, because I don't want to seem greedy to the gods or anything like that, and I'm just trying to live and stay home with my child and not really doing anything besides maybe my podcast and all that, and working on my spirituality stuff, which is super uber important, which I've just done for the last 3 years basically. First year was just like a trial to figure out what the fuck I have to do. I was back and forth in New Age, didn't really know. Had a dark night of the soul, start and begin in there while I found magic, and I began starting magic, and the problem was that I was afraid of spirits, so I had to conquer that before I could even go any further with the whole magic thing. And that was, right between the first and second year of me going from New Age to the magic curriculum, Cabal, and the great work of self-transformation. So, that being said, we're going to have to pause it. It's going to be too long if I keep going. All right, so yeah, the point I'm trying to get at is, the last 3 years I was at home and I was working on my spirituality and all this shit. And, now, besides, when my wife minded, I'm not able to, for me anyways, and maybe this is a programming I still have to work on, but to me it would be too much to ask for like a 20 grand, 3 or 4 times. I got 10 grand 3 times and a bunch of different things from 5 grand to 500 to 100s to a bunch of different monies whenever I needed them. And, I've speeded up checks, and I've gotten extra on checks that, I was already supposed to get and shit like that, and got my wife's, money that was owed to her faster and shit like that. So I've been doing very well, but imagine that if I go to the workplace and I'm making that money and that covers my bills, then all the extra that comes in that I can ask for, let's say I ask for 20 grand and I give 10 of that away to a charity or some foundation, and then I have 10 grand and I'm able to use it to start my business, or just keep it in the bank, or whatever the case may be. Okay, help pay off my house faster, doesn't matter. But if I share some of this money, all right, and I'm working to pay my bills, and I don't have to spend 10 of that grand to stay caught up on my bills for the next, few months, then, that's a good thing. Essentially, anyways, I think. And that's one of the reasons why I put it there, just because the power was going to die on the computer. So I'll put my phone in my pocket and I'll keep talking. I'm going to move the charger over here once it gets a little bit more of a charge going. But anyways, holy fuck. Put it that way to see the outside, to see if you can see me better. But not too bad. Anyways, so by working once again. But anyway, so Jordan Peterson, he talks about how when you put yourself in stressful positions, or you face your fears, or for me, the second time around for my Dark Night of the Soul, had a lot to do with going back to work. And I didn't want to. I was waiting around for a great opportunity to come, for my passion or purpose to happen, right? But you have to work at your passion and purpose and shit like that. And, this podcast seemed to have some signs that it might be, to a certain effect, something I want to do. Maybe I want a job in radio. Maybe I want to be whatever the case is. I don't know. But the more I got into it, I really like doing this as a hobby, as a talent, as helping people out, as maybe a way of getting knowledge out there to those who seek it. And maybe right now it's not popular, but maybe eventually, and maybe it'll happen over time as long as it's out there for people to see, even if I long gone and stop and I'm too busy to record or something like that. But maybe eventually I'll get to a point where, even if it's just 5 people this month, 5 people this month, 5 people this month, people find it as they need it. They're looking for a guru, and say for some reason they don't get to Freight or they don't get to Birch for whatever reason, but they find me. And then they get the book, and then they find Frater, and they find Birch, and then they find Peterson during the Dark Night of the Soul. So then, great, my job is accomplished. That's what I'm doing here. That's what I meant. But anyways, what Jordan Peterson told and said was, when you do that, different things get unlocked. It's like you have this potential, right? But if you choose to just stay at home and do nothing, then you'll never unlock that potential. And this is paraphrasing, and this is, a lot less smart sounding, and probably the way it's supposed to be said. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to, I know what I'm trying to get at, but I'm having trouble saying the words. But, he put it in a better way that makes a lot more sense to me anyways. But anyways, for me to paraphrase what he said was basically that if, you put yourself in these different positions, then, especially if they're hard positions, then it's the same concept about taking on responsibility. When you take on responsibility, it gives you meaning for your life, but at the same time, you see what you're made out of. Especially, and anybody going through a hard, traumatic time, at first it might be overwhelming, but eventually, they either kill themselves and say, I can't deal with it, or they fucking go through it and figure out how strong they are. And potentially, maybe they teach others after. You know what I mean? If, it's not too unbearable to keep looking at. And eventually, we all have to deal with these hard things. So by putting myself back in the workplace, because my goal was, okay, well, I'll find a job that I like, okay? Because this way, at least I'm not going to work every day, hating myself, dying a little bit inside. You know what I mean? Because that would be pretty shitty, and that's what I didn't want. I took this time off to find myself. I started finding myself, and I wanted to try to do something because I really believe that you can manifest your own life. I really believe that whatever you want, you can have. I really believe if you find your passion and purpose, then you get to do that passion and purpose, and it will pay for itself, basically, in the end. There's your talents, and there's something you're good at, and there's something you can provide to the community. Sometimes that could be all the same thing. Sometimes that could be different things. Maybe it's always all the same thing, but it just takes time to unravel, and then it depends on you and your willingness to put yourself in these hard situations to unravel it. Because if you're not willing to put yourself in hard situations to unravel it, then, you know what I mean, then you're always going to be like, how come magic doesn't work? How come it doesn't work? How come the law of attraction is not working? Well, you have to put action forth, right? So anyway, part of my putting my action forth, part of hitting this dark night, the second dark night of the soul, where I needed to face this other fear of doing a job I hate, I got myself a job that I really like. It has a pretty good pay. Now, I'm not super thrilled about it. It's not something I really want to do, but it makes for an interesting means of using my magic for protection all the time, and it's not from anything demonic or anything like that, just from the dangers of work and shit like that. And the fact that I'm on a rotating shift, which is one of the reasons I get paid a little bit more than most people would for something similar, and the fact that I've already been advanced a few times and gotten given new responsibilities, and this is only my 4th week I'm starting. So they're really doing a good job keeping me involved and not getting bored fast, because someone with ADD and even ADHD can get bored very fast, very quick, and lose interest in shit very fast and very quick. That's one of the problems, and why I got in trouble in school more than anything is because I was disruptive. But it's because there was nothing stimulating me or keeping me involved enough at school. I would finish the work and that was it. But when I had a teacher that understood or knew my potential, she would give me extra work, and I could work on it. And I was involved. I wasn't disrupting anybody, and that's actually what I want. The older I got, they knew I wouldn't want to admit that in front of other kids. So if they just gave it to me quietly or spoke to me after class saying, I'll do this because I know you like it, blah, 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 and you're a smart kid, and they talked about it, I was like, yeah, no problem, thank you. You know what I mean? But then there was assholes that I had to deal with that maybe didn't want to, stuck in the ways or whatever. Maybe they were a really good teacher at once, but they didn't want to put up with it. But, at the same time, if I wouldn't have had these bad teachers and wouldn't have gone through the things I've gone through, then I wouldn't be where I am right now. So, in a way at the time, yeah, I might think they're dicks and whatever, but ultimately they did me a favor. I mean, I was great in math. I still am great in math. But in grade 11, I failed math, and that was a hard blow to take. And it wasn't that I didn't know the work. It's that I was skipping too much. But I was so arrogant that I thought because I got 90s and even had perfect tests that I could pass even if I wasn't there. But I went over, I think it was 15 days, and maybe it was even more than that. But there was a certain amount of days that if you miss this X amount of days or more, then you automatically fail the class. You automatically get a 45 no matter what your grade was, or 42 or 43, whatever it was. And that's what happened. You know, and I held it against him even though I didn't follow the rules, and I used it as an excuse to get in trouble and skip even more classes, and then I got expelled from school. But it forced me to realize that I have to, unfortunately, not bow down to the authority, but while I'm in school, if there's a teacher I don't like, either switch the class within the time frame I have, or have to suck it up and just get through it somehow, you know. And, you know, I got back into school and I got my grade 12 and all that. But anyway, so back to the reason why I'm working and all that is just because I can manifest what I want and get my dreams and have money in the bank and whatever else. And like I said, everything is so much worse in your mind than whenever you actually go and face that fear. 9 times out of 10, when you face your fear, it's not there. But in this case, it wasn't like going outside and thinking there's a spider or a wolf about to kill me, and then it turns out, oh, there's no spider or wolf. I was like, I have to get a job. This job's going to suck. I mean, it's so bad in my mind, but when I got it and I have it, it's not that bad. You know, I have all these different, sometimes I'm on days when I get to spend time with my family. Great. Other times I'm on afternoons and I have this time quiet, you know, I have quiet before work, I have quiet after work where I can focus on me, my spirituality, super intensely. And then I haven't done the overnight shift yet, to be honest. Like I said, this is my 4th week. I did 2 weeks on days, 2 weeks on afternoons. Now I'm going to be doing the overnight shift. And, you know, I'm going to come home and everybody's going to be off to school, and then it's going to be either time for spirituality or sleep. And then I'm going to wake up and everybody's going to be home, have supper with my family, and then I go off to work when they're going off to bed, kind of thing. So that's going to be interesting too. So basically out of the weeks, you know, I'm going to have, you know, if I have 2-day weeks in 1 month, well, then I'll only have 2 weeks that month that I can, you know, have lots of time for my spirituality and my podcast, you know. But most months where I'm going to have, you know, one or the other, either the afternoons or then overnights twice, which is going to happen more often because there's 2 of them, well, then I'm going to have more time to work on this stuff, even though I'm working, and I'm going to have this alone time. Whereas when I was off, I never had alone time because I had my daughter and all that. And this is a good thing for her because the rate that she's been learning words has increase like 7-fold or even more. Like, she's doing great and she loves it there, and it's helping with her overall attitude now. You know, she has a lot of mucus and phlegm in her, and I've been checking it, and it's not yellow yet, where mine is, unfortunately, but I'm working on that, and as you can tell, I don't look or feel sick. But anyways, so it's all good all around, but the main reason I did that is because when you add spirituality to what Jordan Peterson talks about, it's great. Now, I know a lot of people may not like Jordan Peterson, and it all depends on if you actually listen to the man, or if you just got into the controversy, or if you're one of the people you think he's against, or whatever the case is. And I'm not here to tell you to listen to him or not listen to him. I hope you don't judge me for listening to him, but to me, he's a teacher, teaches at the Toronto University. He's taught at Harvard, all these other places. So he's got great knowledge in all his fields. I mean, if you go through all the things he's done from consulting with all these different businesses, firms, these huge people, politicians, all the shit, which I don't like politicians, but he's done so many things, from inventing things, from marketing to what he's doing now. It's unbelievable. But just the fact that he is a psychology teacher, a psychiatrist, I forget what it's, a psychoanalysis or a psychotherapist, just those 3 things alone, if all his lectures on YouTube, you can watch them, or, you know, he's got Spreaker, where he's got his things about his books, Maps and Meaning, which is a hard book, but I've read it. It's fucking amazing, and I've read 12 Rules for Life, and I think I put both of them on here for you guys for a link, and maybe I'll redo that if I have time. I haven't been putting my links on my last 2 videos, so I'm sorry I've been slipping, but that's the whole extra working thing. But one of these days, it's all I'll do. But anyways, oh yeah, and I'm probably going to put some Reiki books on here, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyways, so just, you know, you don't have to get into controversial shit if you don't like to. But what I would say is, you know, and if you don't like the man, you don't like the man, okay? I'm sure there's other psychiatrists doing this now, because whether he was the first or not the first to do this, someone else is going to do exactly what he's doing. I guarantee there's somebody out there, you know, you might just not know about it yet, but this is an idea that made him super popular. So some other teacher that teaches either something different or the same is going to do exactly what he's doing, and you just have to find it. So whatever field you want to learn, whatever you want to learn, okay, you know, and if you don't have the money to go to college or university to learn that, if you look it up, you know, eventually, you know, it might take some time, but eventually you might find somebody like Jordan Peterson who has recorded all his lectures for a specific amount of time. and you're not going to get probably the full because you don't have the book to work out of, and you might not be getting the homework, and you might not record it all, but you can get a great foundation for psychology, for psychiatry, and he's going to give you books to read and shit like that, and you can literally break it down and fucking make a course out of it almost, like he talks in a lot of different videos what he does when he has people he works with, right? If someone has a specific fear, he'll break down first things he does and then what they do over time and how he continues to work with them and what he tells them to do on their own time to combat this. And you could say, okay, well, how's that helpful? What do you mean? How's that helpful? That's fucking huge. If you're doing a dark night of the soul or your shadow work, whatever you want to call it, or just you have fears you have to combat. Now you have exactly what a psychologist, psychiatrist would do with you. And if you have a partner or anybody you trust, you can get them to act as that person and break that out of you. Or you do it upon yourself. To write down the criteria and then start writing, because writing is super important. If you didn't watch my last video, that's what it's about, or supposed to be about. I think I talked more about a bunch of crap and then only like 10 minutes at the end about writing. But point is, you can work on yourself using his info. And, if you do want to be a psychiatrist or psychologist, well, then this is going to give you a great foundation as you work and try to save up to take that course or whatever the case is. So many positives. So he's one of those people that, I don't know personally. I don't know why he's controversial. I do. But if you watch his stuff and you get his opinion, okay, based on his opinion, what he's trying to do is not what people paint him out as. And it's not what he's trying to accomplish is what they're saying. However, you're only getting his opinion. Obviously, his opinion is going to be biased towards him. And, if you're a woman or someone trans and you hear his message, it could be misconstrued as he's all for men in this. And if you think that men have been oppressing women, then you might be against him and all that. And I understand that. That's 100% your choice. And I'm not going to tell you you're right or wrong or anything like that. I do believe there has been oppression of women. And there potentially still can be oppression of women and stuff like that. So, I'm never going to say yes or no to that or argue or debate that. All I'm saying is he's got some great knowledge. I'll do my best not to put too much more of his stuff on here since he does have his own podcast, his own Instagram, his own Spreaker, and probably God knows what else. So check his stuff out. And, just going to bed with some of his stuff on, whether it's his book or his other shit, you'll wake up with the knowledge, and you'll know how to, it'll help you and your family. Whenever something's happening with you and your wife, you'll be able to break it down in your head. You won't be able to tell her that when she's all pissed off at you. All that, well, you're just doing this because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, because even my wife's saying now, hey, I'm not one of your little psychotherapy sessions, and you can't just break it down like you're some fake psychiatrist with me. She's literally been saying that to me, because that's how I've been acting. Like attracts like, all I'm taking in him, and I guess I'm spitting that image out. And, probably not in a good way, because I'm obviously not educated like him. However, that's the way this shit works. But, besides the point, let's get into what I want to talk about today. And that's the 7 Hermetic principles. And it kind of ties into what I was just talking about. And what was I just talking about? Well, I was just talking about the shadow work and all that, and Jordan Peterson, how that's important, and blah, blah, blah. Putting yourself in a difficult position, basically. And by putting yourself in a difficult position, your potential, especially for what is associated with, the position you put yourself in, like whatever you do, whether it's a job or you're going to have a family, or, you've been putting off something, you decide, no, fuck it, I'm not putting it off anymore, I'm just going to do it. Well, whatever it is, your potential for that type of situation is going to be unlocked, but there's going to be other things that come along with it, especially if you've been doing the same kind of stuff that I'm doing, reading the same, watching the same. You're going to have all these correspondences coming, and it's going to be, because everything, I swear to God, everything ties in together. Everything comes down to the same shit overall. I mean, I believe this, because as above, so below, as within, so without is everywhere. So whether it's psychology, psychiatry, whether it's, spirituality, whether it's politics, whether it's religion, which isn't the same as spirituality, whether it's home life, raising kids, that you can find the correspondences between all of it, all the time. I'm telling you, it's truly something remarkable. And that's the point. So, someone doesn't believe in magic. Okay, well, this person may try it, but if they have the belief or programming, both can be, and they can be different. Someone can start believing something differently, but still have the programming inside them, and then this will stop certain things from happening. Okay? Hands down. Meaning, so if you think magic is true and you start following it, start reading the books consciously and all this, and you try doing the rituals and all that. So then you do a sigil. But you do have the belief that magic isn't real. Something like that inside you, right? Something that's been programmed in years ahead, and maybe it's because of the religious belief, and maybe you read that part in the Bible that said the nonsense that, magic, blah, 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 it's condemned. Therefore, your subconscious is like, well, I'm not going to let this happen, because if I do this, that means I'm bad, because the Bible said that, and the Bible to me is real and what we're supposed to follow, blah, 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 blah. So it may or may not work, okay, in that sense. You're supposed to be doing a sigil, get with a sigil, and make it happen, okay? So in that sense, you do have to get rid of that programming somehow, all right? And, whether it's condemning the whole Bible or, reprogramming your mind, hypnotherapists and all that. But if someone doesn't believe in magic as well as has the same programming that, reinforces that and for some reason tries it, well, that's a double whammy. And, if they're not smart enough to go see a hypnotherapist or psychologist to work out their issues or whatever the case may be, then yeah, they're not going to be able to perform magic. But, all right, 7 Hermetic principles are not just for magic, all right? Now, there are people think they're exclusively put together, but witchcraft uses it, which is magic as well. I get that. It's not ceremonial magic, but it's still magic. But there are different places around the world, different cultures, even religions, okay, that I recognize that use the 7 Hermetic principles, okay? And the reason for it, the reason for them using this, and why everybody should know the 7 Hermetic principles, okay, is because they are the rules. The law of universe, the law of nature, the laws that we are bound by, okay? Because man-made laws, okay? You can't do this or you go to jail. You can't do this or go to jail. Now they have to enforce it, right? Meaning, if you do something bad, you can hide. You can hide and maybe get away with it. You can fake your death, possibly, A lot of things are harder now today with technology, but, you go back 50, 70 years and you murdered somebody, I'm sure you could probably get away with it a lot better. However, the Hermetic laws are going to come into effect, right? And if you kill somebody, there's going to be psychological effects. There's going to be the cause and effect. You caused murder, and the effect is you're going to have to live with that murder. You're going to believe in bad karma. You're going to have to look over your shoulder all the time, blah, 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 blah. Polarity is going to come into play. The law of gender will even come into play. All is mind. Your mind's going to fuck with you. Like attracts like. You're going to be in a dark place. You're going to have nasty thoughts. It's going to drive you crazy, and you might even just turn yourself in. Either way, and which kind of makes the man laws coincide with the Hermetic laws. But point is, the Hermetic laws are the laws for this reality. You don't have to take a book, take someone's philosophy, believe someone completely, and take on their beliefs as your own, take on their programming as your own. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is know the 7 Hermetic principles and put them into practice. And that is how you make your own practice, whatever you want, whether it's ceremonial witchcraft, which is my practice, which is what I call what I do basically. Now, I don't need a name. However, I like having a name for you people. It's not the actual name of my magical practice or anything like that. Just like I wouldn't tell you I call myself the ceremonial witch on here, so I don't accidentally one day tell you what my magical name is, because I program my subconscious mind to have my magical name so that when I'm trying to call on that part of my mind, it helps me get into trance, because it's also now a trigger for me to get into trance faster, and it's a light trance where my minds are now connected, but I'm still consciously able to talk to my subconscious, and I keep that going by meditating, and meditating is where my subconscious talks to my conscious mind. And when you're sleeping, same thing, your subconscious is completely taken over, and the better you have a connection through meditation and trance and ritual work and shit like that, the easier it will be for you to remember your dreams, because your dreams is when your subconscious mind. So if your conscious mind gets out of the way or has cross communication, then you'll remember your dreams better. It's super uber important. But anyways, point of all that was that. Fuck, I forgot what the fucking point was going to be. I had a point to all that shit. Not just in time, I gotta pause it because I can only put 20 minutes at a time and send it to me to put it on my computer, because it works better on the computer to do the speaker episodes. But anyways. Alright, I guess I'm back on. I hit the button, I didn't even know it. Alright, well. Started talking about the 7 Hermetic principles and subconscious mind and all this crap. So, anyway, so the point of all that was 7 Hermetic principles are law. The real laws we should go by. Now there are nature laws that come into effect. You can read books such as the 50 Laws and 50 Principles and 50 Universal Laws or 100 Universal Laws and things like that. But to me, it's all going to be deviations of the Hermetic principles. And then, Frater Xavier has Laws of Magic series or whatever, which I never listened to, and he talks about one being authority and shit like that. So something you should probably check out too is the laws of magic, meaning he breaks down the laws of magic. He takes probably the 7 Hermetic principles, and then from there gives you specific laws of magic that you should or should not do, because the 7 Hermetic principles are packed with knowledge, right? Cause and effect. The first part of the book breaks down every one of the 7 Hermetic principles a little bit, and then throughout the end of the book it goes even deeper. So within the principle of cause and effect, within the principle of the rhythm, within the principle of all is mind and, correspondences, gender, polarity, within all these ones are going to be a bunch of things you should and should not do. So someone like Frater, I believe, breaks that down. Or there might actually be somewhere where it goes through the laws of magic, and he's giving his version and how he understands that. I don't know, because I've never seen such a thing as that, but I have read like the 50 laws, nature's laws, universal laws and shit like that, different books like that. And, it does help out, but it doesn't have to be more complicated than 7 Hermetic principles. And from this, you can make your magical practice. Because once again, the 7 Hermetic principles is what's going to happen. Whether you're aware or unaware, whether you believe or do not believe, whether you have programming or not programming. These 7 Hermetic principles are what being used. And if you don't believe that, well, then ask yourself, well, how did you become programming in the first place? Well, someone used the 7 Hermetic principles and, with a creation and invention such as the TV, radio, sound waves, frequency, vibration, all this shit. Used all this and then was able to program you. And now you have to break that programming using the same way it was used against you. And that's where the 7 Hermetic principles come from. The first one is the all is mind. We're all in the mind of God. Because we're all in the mind of God, we all have a mind. God is experiencing this life, or all is experiencing this life through us. Therefore, because he's experiencing the life through us, and we are extensions of the all. I keep saying he, but it's not he or she, it's it, okay? Mercury is a good way to think about it, not that Mercury is the god of this realm, because, it'd be somewhere between Mercury, Saturn, the sun, the seven, right? The 7 planets, 7 Hermetic principles, right? There's connections there, right? With the 7 Hermetic principles and the 7 planets being the energies within your body, your 7 chakras, shit like that. Between all this, you can figure shit out, from healing to how to make your life, how to make all this shit happen, okay? By just using magic, you can make all this shit happen. But you don't have to use magic. All you have to use is the 7 Hermetic principles. And you say, well, the 7 Hermetic principles are magic. And, that's one of those things that, yes, 7 Hermetic principles are magic, but magic is not only the 7 Hermetic principles, just like magic is hypnosis, but hypnosis isn't magic, or vice versa. Hypnosis can be magic or used within magic. You can use it for magical purposes, but magic is not only hypnosis. It's not only NLP. It's not only, planetary shit. It's a big variety of things that you can or cannot use. You can use some of it. You can use all of it. But you need to know the 7 Hermetic principles for magic. Now, the 7 Hermetic principles, I believe, are not like hypnosis in that, whereas, magic uses the 7 Hermetic principles, but magic isn't only the 7 Hermetic principles, which is true. However, the 7 Hermetic principles are probably above and beyond magic itself, because, as much as magic uses 7 Hermetic principles, 7 Hermetic principles aren't magic. And it's not like where I said hypnosis. Hypnosis isn't just magic, because hypnosis can be used for a variety of things. But technically, it's kind of like a magical scenario. But magic isn't only hypnosis, because you can do different means, sigils and shit like that. Whereas when I say that about Hermetic principles, the Hermetic principles are like the foundation. It's like Saturn's laws on this plane, basically. And I don't mean Saturn, well, maybe, but it's like the laws that you have to live by, right? Because Saturn gives you limitations, right? Saturn restricts you. Well, these are the restrictions you have to use. These are the ways to get Saturn on your side, or these are the best way that you can manipulate your reality, basically, or what the 7 Hermetic principles. And it doesn't matter if you believe them or not. I don't believe in polarity. Well, it doesn't mean it fucking isn't true. Just like, I think Peterson said once, if you don't believe in something, well, he used the example of something like, if you don't believe in pain, it doesn't mean if you fucking break your foot, you're not going to fucking feel that pain. Maybe if you truly were some Zen motherfucker who's practiced this shit for 20 years and then you broke your foot and you were able to fight that, then yeah, possibly. But us right now, fucking not going to happen, People that break fucking concrete things, they picture it happening or already happened, and their hand isn't broken. And I've seen people put in hypnosis that get cut that don't fucking bleed. You know what I mean? So shit's possible. Because, pain is something that is like a created whatever, and it's just our nervous system telling us what to feel. If you have your nervous system in check, well, then you can technically tell your nervous system, no, I don't want to feel that, basically. Once again, that'd be using the 7 Hermetic principles. Pain you can probably manipulate, but you can't manipulate the 7 Hermetic principles. You can use them. You can be at the cause to create the effect you want. Otherwise, if you're not using magic or you're not using 7 Hermetic principles, then you're going to, the effect you get is going to be from the cause that was created for you. Meaning, you watch TV every night and you see something happening over and over again. Poverty, fucking disease. And then eventually, the people around you become impoverished and you or someone get a disease. Well, the cause of that was continuously watching and programming and reaffirming in your mind that this shit is real, because your mind doesn't know, so your subconscious doesn't know the difference between real and fake. Subconscious is super powerful, but it doesn't know the difference between real and fake. Your conscious mind is the one that has to be the filter, the one to protect your subconscious mind. So when you're consciously awake, don't subjugate yourself to something like that, because it's going to be the cause and the effect. And polarity is another one of those things. If you subjugate yourself to the political polarity or the religious polarity or any of these polarities, if you're plus and you hate minus, or you're minus and you hate plus, well then you're going to fucking go back and forth on the pendulum, and every time you're where you hate, everything's going to be brutal, and you're going to keep recursing yourself to keep putting it even worse every single time. The only thing we can expect is change. You're always going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. However, if the way a reality is whenever you're down and you don't know that this is something that happens to everybody, if you don't just say, well, you know what, it's just a matter of time before I'm up, I'll find the good in this down, dark fucking place I am in right now, and by doing that, I will push it to the other side myself. If when you're down, you curse yourself and say so many bad things that make it happen for you, then you're going to go back this way, but not all the way that way, because then you're going to bring yourself back this way. That's polarity using against you, basically. Instead of you using, like, if you're in a bad place and you start thinking about all the good shit, well, now you're going to make yourself go this way, and then every time you go this way, it's not going to be so bad, and then you're going to be going only maybe like this, and you're going to stay in the middle because you're depolarized. You're not on the pendulum going, ooh, everything is so good, oh shit, it's good, oh shit, oh fuck, it's bad, fuck, this sucks, fucking bullshit, oh my god, everything's great again, just like the moon does, it waxes and wanes, right? So anyways, the 7 Hermetic principles are key, and your belief is not required, because, and this is what I think, the magic, this is why I said what I said, that magic should be, the definition of magic should be that someone who is using the principles, using their mind to do what they want to do. They've realized what our power is, our mind power is, and they're using it to their benefit. That should be the definition of magic and the not the Hermetic principles, but so the Hermetic principles are key, are super uber important. Dark night of the soul, divination, the two things I'm going to talk about later. You can't do these things without the 7 Hermetic principles, right? It's cause and effect, it's the law of vibration, it's the law of gender, it's polarity, it's all these things. And if you're polarized, or you're at the wheel of cause, and then you keep getting shitty effects. Well, the rhythm is the pendulum. Okay, it's not cause and effect, but you can see how those two are very similar. But the point is, if you don't know about the law of rhythm and all this shit, then how are you gonna advance yourself? How are you gonna do anything? You're just gonna be at the you won't be able to effectively use divination if you're not depolarized, because if you're not depolarized, at least to a certain extent, then anything you get from the tarot cards, anything you get from scrying, anything you get from, even using a dowel. Why would it fucking let you know where there's water or something like that if that's what you were looking for, or oil or whatever? Why would it let you if you're just going to use it for shitty ends and, something? Anyways, point is, you can't do anything properly unless you're using the 7 Hermetic principles. And to use polarity, the law of rhythm, and cause and effect, okay? If you use these effectively, I believe, these 3, then you can get yourself out of a state of karma, because if you're creating your own causes, all right, by the use of polarity and knowing the rhythm, right? Knowing when to use it, because if you're all in a negative side, then you use the positive polarity, and if you're on the positive side, you use a negative polarity, right? We're in the cause and effect. Okay, so that's using that's using the law of rhythm and polarity, right? Well, but you're also manipulating cause and effect, because by using the positive polarity, when you're on the negative side of the pendulum of the law of rhythm, then you're creating a different cause, where you're causing yourself to go the opposite way, and then, or causing yourself to, basically causing yourself to go the other way. And when you're on the positive side of polarity, I'm not saying you need to find the negative sides, but if you make it grandiose and because you're positive, you make it, oh, it's so great, and you're scared of losing it and stuff like that. That's how it would happen, right? Because if you're 2+, well, you can't get any more plus if you're so happy. All you can do is become more negative, right? So you're being scared of losing it. Well, that's the wrong thing. You be grateful for it. You thank everybody for it, and you can make more happen that way and continue yourself to go that way. So once again, you're using those 3 principles, using cause and effect, using the law of polarity, and you're using the law of rhythm, all right? And cohesion with each other. And this is why they say you can go from karma to grace. Saturn gives you some leeway and it's not really, I can't tell you if it's Saturn actually giving you leeway or not, but it's you using the Hermetic principles properly, okay? This is what happened with me when I first stopped working. I stopped working, but technically I lost my job and I got the 10 grand. And I got the time to stay home. And what I had to do was not focus on this shit, not focus on the bills, not focus on all this crap. I had to stay positive and realize that this was a good thing. This was a blessing. Everything was great. And by doing so, I remained great. And it wasn't until I started being fearful because, me and my wife went through the money too fast that I'm like, oh, fuck, I need to do something. I might need to get a job. I might need to do this. And because I kept saying that, it caused me to go there. And then eventually, inevitably, I was on that side where shit was so rough. We were fighting, blah, 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 blah. But that's all I was focusing on because things were so good and great that all I could think about was bad. Now that I know this, I can only know this, though, from going through this, right? By reading the Kabbalion and getting the correspondences and now understanding that that's what happened and being able to use that in a positive way. And it's something you've got to think about. And you got to be able to realize it. Now, the moon can help with this because the moon waxes and wanes, but you got to make yourself in sync with that. Before you're in sync with that, then you might be on the opposite. When the moon's on the positive side, when it's technically waxing, you may be waning. You might be on the side of the pendulum that you don't like. It might be that time of the month where, you don't have so much money. And because a lot of us live paycheck to paycheck, and, that can cause a lot of this. It's not the only reason to be happy or sad about, but it can cause a lot of this to happen, and it can make your pendulum swing super fucking fast. You get paid, first 3 days after you're paid, great, the next 3 days are small. And you got to look at it that way too, because, you have your daily pendulum, you have your monthly pendulum, you got your weekly pendulum, you got your yearly pendulum, you got your lifely pendulum, and you can break it down and make it bigger however you want it. Because every day is technically like your birth chart. But then your birth chart, you could look at it on like a lifetime, and you can look at it on a daily, because the day you're born, whatever time you were born at is basically where your first house starts, right? So then you can figure out where all the different hours of the day are, basically from there. And every one of your days may be like that. So by knowing that, you can kind of look at the 7 Hermetic principles in conjunction with the 7 planets and your chart and the 12 signs and all this shit, and figure out where your positive and negative polarities are, because you're gonna you have plus signs and you have minus signs, right? Anything that's earth and water is a negative, anything that's air and fire is a positive. So depending on your chart, right? How does the chart go? Well, Aries, right? Air, Taurus, fire, or earth, and then Gemini. Okay, so Aries is fire. Sorry, fire, and then Earth, right? Because they're opposite each other, right? Because fire and earth is male and female, right? Mars and Venus, right? Opposite each other. But that's positive, negative. And then it goes to Gemini, air. And then it goes to Cancer, water. Positive, negative, right? So there's your pendulum. There's a pendulum. There's a pendulum. And, it's going back and forth to positive. But it's also the law of gender, which comes into play, right? Also. But the point is, there's so many ways to use this, okay? And you can use that on a day-to-day breakdown. You can use it on a weekly, monthly. You can break it down in so many different ways. And I don't want to get too complicated with this shit. Point is, there are ways to look at this differently than maybe people are saying about. Think outside the box. It's going to help you out greatly. But use the 7 Hermetic principles to your benefit. Literally on, I have an iPhone, so I have Apple Podcasts, and, right on there. I don't think it's free. There's a LibriVox fucking thing, and on the Apple Podcast, it's probably on Spreaker too. I wrote Kabbalion in, okay? And then under there, it's got it broken down by segments. First one being intro, second one being the 7 Hermetic principles, and then it goes through them all. And if you don't want to listen to the first part that you've already listened to, then you can listen to just polarity and just cause and effect and just law of rhythm and gender and the mind correspondences and all that. It's right there, and you can do that while you're working, driving, whatever, just to refresh it, and then it'll help you. It'll help you. But anyways. The whole point of that was just to tell you that, there's some good knowledge here, and that's what you need to know. Because a lot of people, and I'm included, I've been listening to a lot of Peterson right now because it just helped me through my dark night of the soul, which is, I can't say it's done, but it's more or less done. And, with fucking Halloween coming up and, the dumb supper, your ancestors coming to visit you, I don't want to be in a dark place for that, I want to be happy, I want to celebrate that. So, by using this shit to my advantage, by listening to too much Peterson, it can kind of cause things to happen because he's not magic per se. I use magic to have him, but if you listen to something too long, you maybe risk, your subconscious mind hearing too much and adopting policies and shit from that person. So you can't really do that. But I am trying to learn as much as I can about psychology and, all the things he has to teach. And like I said, mainly it's because I want to do magic while I'm working. My work's going to cover my bills, or the magic cover my bills, and the work or the magic will be what I put in the bank to start a business. Like I said, if I can get lucky and get a big amount, well, not lucky, but if I do everything properly and I'm doing everything right and it's within the realm of possibility and the universe is what I want, Because once again, what I want and what is good for me and what I need are two different things. So if you want something, you do magic for it, you're going to get a variation of that. And people say, well, it could be on the magic, could be this, could be that. But a lot of the times, we say, well, maybe it's your programming, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Or maybe it's just something that would actually harm you. So you got what the universe thought you could handle, a small, minute piece of that. Because, like I said, I got 10 grand 3 times, right? And I went through it fast. I think it was a good lesson. I learned my lesson. And I haven't done it since. I've been doing smaller amounts that I can maintain that won't just be shot away fruitlessly, right? And that's where the issue comes in, because if I kept doing the 10 grand, then my wife would probably have no doubt in her mind that this shit's real. But at the same time, I don't want her to think, well, he can do this anytime he wants, so then I'll just piss it away every time, you know what I mean? So I had to break it down, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful for it, and I didn't want to seem like it's okay for me to just pull this money out of my ass all the time, because truthfully, that part of the transformation, before this, I thought, oh, great, do magic, get money, fuck yeah, I wouldn't have cared, but now, through the transformation process, I'm actually realizing that it's not about that, that doesn't even give you, when you first realize it happened, it's fucking amazing. It's a great feeling, but it doesn't last long. And it's like, okay, well, what now? It's not something that was long lasting or enjoyable either, So you got to find, now that I'm back at work, then there's no issue with her. She's going to realize, and she can piss that money away if she wants. After the bills are paid, I don't give a fuck. The money I make or whatever is going to be mine alone. Not necessarily mine alone. Obviously, if we have issues, something happens, whatever. But point is, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to appease Saturn. I'm not going to be at home laying around. I'm giving myself responsibility. I'm going to unlock more potential by doing this and put myself in different positions. And, after I do this correctly, and I'm able to save and not spend stupidly and all that, then maybe, Saturn will say, okay, well, he's ready maybe for a little more responsibility. So I'll have something else that's going to test me and prepare me for the ability to be able to handle those children. Because, maybe being at 30, I might not be understanding and I'm in a great position to help those kids. And honestly, I don't care when it happens. It's not about having the business, not about having the freedom of being home, because I don't think that's going to be easy at all. It's about actually being able to do that and doing that properly. And now that I know what I know, I have to be ready for that. I can't just sit at home waiting for a great opportunity. And even when one comes, I wouldn't even know it, because I had this preconceived notion that it's going to be this, and it's just as bad as thinking magic is like instantaneous and you win the lottery as soon as you try your first time, and if that doesn't happen, the magic isn't real. Same kind of concept. That's not what was going to help me, but I had to go through that to realize what I know now. You know what I mean? And people might think, okay, well, we started listening to him because he said he did all this and he was a stay-at-home dad, and we can do it too. And you fucking can, but you need. During that time, while you do that, if staying at home with your kids is not what you're supposed to be doing, And I'm sure a lot of people, that is what they're supposed to be doing. But if it's not actually what you should be doing or supposed to be doing, then you may not be able to maintain it. You know what I mean? I was able to stay home when my daughter was a certain age. And that was about almost 3. She turns 3 on the 25th of this month. And so that's pretty fucking soon. I think today's the 14th or 15th. 10 days, 11 days, something like that. But that's not what I meant to do. I mean, like I said, I was just sitting here and, everything was going great. And I wasn't feeling great, which I could sit here and think someone's cursing me and getting all pissed off about it because, that's one of those signs that everything's going good and you don't feel good, and then things start going bad because you don't feel bad, and like attracts like, blah, 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 blah. Basically curse yourself, and I didn't want that anymore. But I also didn't want to go back to work, so I was like, I can't stay here, but I can't go there. What the fuck do I do? And that was, bam, shadow work, all hitting me all at the same time. And no matter what I do, I'm not happy, yet I should be happy. I'm enjoying my daughter and all this. Like I said, when I was playing with my daughter, I was happy. But I couldn't do that forever because, she'd have to go to school unless I homeschooled her. But then I'd have to have a means to pay for that. And you can't stay on EI for too long and can't go on welfare and homeschool my daughter because I can't maintain this house and cars on welfare and shit like that. So what the fuck am I going to do, right? So this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm working at. She's going to be fine. I had to realize that. And Peterson also helped with that. I can't baby her. I can't protect her. I can't keep her here. I can't treat her like that because all you can do is prepare her for the snakes and the bad shit that's going to happen to her. So when something bad happens to her, she's not distraught and, overwhelmed and everything just sucks. That whenever something bad happens to her, she's prepared for it. Obviously, it's still going to hurt, and it's going to probably hurt me if I know about it and when I know about it. But same sense, at least she'll be prepared and she can move forward, and she won't be, the first time she has a boyfriend and gets dumped. It's going to hurt no matter what. But if she realizes that's part of life, she realizes, if I teach her right, mom teaches her right, if she knows that we went through many relationships and, the first one feels special, but it's not always, it's just because it's the first time you're feeling those feelings. It's not necessarily meaning that it's the one. And, the movies make it seem like, when you have these feelings, that's what it is. But that's not necessarily what it is. You can only prepare them, right? But they're going to eventually make their own mistakes. And through those mistakes, they're going to realize what they need to realize. And hopefully it's not to the point where there's any imbalances where when that happens, it's too overwhelming that they hide themselves, like the whole Sleeping Beauty fucking thing, right? She met a guy, she got traumatized, asleep forever, and then the real prince had to kiss her awake kind of thing. That's because she was babied and protected and hid and sheltered so nothing bad could happen to her. So when something small bad happened to her, bam, it was the end of the world. Just like when you're on opiates, you don't feel any pain, you go crazy. But then when you're not on the opiates, the first little piece of pain you feel is fucking 100-fold. It can be just something you normally wouldn't feel. See, here's those correspondences again. It's everywhere and everything, and that's Hermetic principles. And that's what everybody needs to learn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, it is 12:26 right now, which isn't the time I'm going to be putting this on, and I really want to go through Divination and the Dark Night of the Soul and all that, but I'm not going to have time because I have to do a few things, actually. I just got a few texts and a few chores I have to do before I go, so I'm just going to upload this little bit and shut it off before I go to work. This way, I don't put on 3 hours and have to fill the spaces with someone else talking on here or anything like that. It'll just be me. But going forward, like I said, I'm not going to restrict any of my talking just because there's a chance that speaker thing could be about censorship and all that. I'm not going to censor myself, and if something happens, whatever. You'll have to just look for me somewhere else, and I'll try to keep you updated or whatever. But anyway, so the Dark Night of the Soul, I've given you some information of what I did, so I'll at least go over that fast before Divination. But what you need to know about Divination is something you need to practice, and like I said before, the more you write, the more you'll get the correspondences, and you don't even have to write and learn about a specific one. But there are easy ones you can start. A little bit of researching and you'll get easy ones, geomancy and stuff like that. Your pendulum that I've been talking about, you can use anything for a pendulum, okay? And it's the easiest form of divination, and it's something everybody should do, okay? 9 times out of 10, I'll even use lists, but this is not its main purpose. But this is the one thing I use on the fly. But you can even take a quarter or a special silver stone or a silver dollar or something you have, okay, and use that for divination as long as you specify and whatever. Now, we do have these fancy ways of divinations, such as, rune may not be a fancy way, but it's definitely a way. tarot and astrology are bigger ways and whatever. Like I said, not geomancy, Tao, using a Tao and things like that. There are so many forms of it, so you need to do your research and do it. But like I said, the pendulum was the first one I did. And there's also like muscle testing and things like that. Like I've went over before, right? You hold your fingers like this, and you got to test it. And things aren't for everybody, but my name is Corey LeBlanc. No matter how hard I try, I can't break that. When I say my name is Jefferson Jones, I can break that, you know what I mean? And that's my body telling me what's true and what's not true, and that takes testing, and that's not the only way to do that. Now, on speaker, I know you couldn't see that, but what I did was make a circle with my thumb and my middle finger. I don't use my index, use my thumb and my middle finger because, well, if you learn anything about hand gestures and prana and yoga and shit like that, there's power through those fingers and holding them together like that, right? You see that on TV when people cross-legged and shit like that. So I suggest using those two fingers because there's more power there. And, you've tested it by doing that, saying, my name is Corey LeBlanc. If you can't break it, no matter how hard you fucking try, which I cannot. My name is Corey LeBlanc. I'm trying. I have a video of me just doing it, and I can't do it. But when you say, my name is Jeff alone, it breaks, and it's not me faking that, So when you ask true questions like, hey, am I on my passion or purpose? And it doesn't break, then okay, great. And is my passion or purpose supposed to stay at home doing nothing? And it breaks, you know what I mean? Things like that. Yeah, it's a form of divination that doesn't cost anything. But a pendulum, you don't have to buy. You don't have to do, you can make your own. You can take one of your rocks. Maybe not use a magnetic rock, stone, crystal, you know what I mean? But you can use that and put it on a string or whatever. You can make your own. Point is, test it first. You need to know what circle is and what nothing is, okay? So you would ask it a question. Is my name Corey LeBlanc? Whenever you drop it, there's plenty of videos out there on that. I don't think I have to go through that. And I think that's different for every person, but, and then whenever you just drop it, if it stays still, you can say side to side, up and down, but I think generally it's circles or still would be your yes or your no. Start with that, then work your way up. But get a tarot deck and play with it and do what Birch said. You can go through the first part, the book that comes with it, and the correspondences, but then shoot the fucking thing out. And then, learn it yourself and see what meanings you can come up with. And every day, practice and make a story and ask it questions. Hey, say you're single. Hey, when am I going to find the love of my life this year? And see what cards you get. And then fucking go on fucking YouTube or any other platform where people are shooting out meanings of tarot cards and then see which one comes up the most that you agree with or whatever. Now, you may not necessarily want to agree with it, but same thing with the reverse or not reverse. And don't try to put it straight up when it comes reverse. Just go with it. And from there, you'll figure out what's what. Same with the astrology, you get your astrology chart, look at different things and then plug them into YouTube and figure it out. Or go and do people's charts, which I still haven't done the one woman's chart I'm supposed to do. I feel so bad about that. It's unbelievable. But I'm going to get that out fucking by the end of the year. Unbelievable. But it's going to be good. But anyways, so Dark Night of the Soul. What have I said before about that? Okay. Well, last time I said things when you were a child that you were told were bad that, you may not even think are bad anymore. Okay. Those are something to go through and refigure out. Okay. This can help unlock things, but more importantly, the things that you were told were bad, and I use Marilyn Manson as an example. Things like Marilyn Manson, if you still think he's a bad man, if you avoid his music and all that, then, that's something you might want to look into. You need to activate. Sorry, I just picked my nose in front of everybody, but I don't have a Kleenex and shit like that. Sorry, guys. But anyways, holy fuck, that's terrible to say online. I got a runny nose, and I'm hoping I'm not getting sick, and being here without a shirt on probably doesn't help. But anyways, actively going and looking at things that make you uncomfortable or that you're scared of, facing it small but surely, and a little bit each day is a way to bring on help or expose and get to your dark side, get to your shadow side, okay? Because your shadow is all the stuff that, one way of thinking of it, and not the only thing about it, but your shadow is all the stuff that you're repressing, that you've ever been through, or that you were told aren't good, and all these things that you don't want to admit that you can do, and shit like that, okay? It's all the bad things that, you're not really bringing up, and you're hiding, and you don't want people to see and all that. The problem with keeping that down is that a trigger or something can happen, and all of a sudden, if it's been oppressed or suppressed for too long, it's going to explode, and it's going to force you into your dark night of the soul. So, if you're on the initiation path, one of the best ways to become enlightened is to use your dark side, to embrace it, to actively put yourself in the positions that are personal to you. Like you can go and explore dark themes, okay? Go read books, watch interviews with serial killers and stuff like that. And I would say that would still help overall start learning and, realizing, because everybody has that potential to be like a Charles Manson. Everybody has the potential to be a Ted Bundy. Everybody has the potential to do awful things to not just strangers that piss them off, but to their own family members, their own children. And the more you understand that, and the more you realize that you can do that, because you can say, I would never do that. I would never do that. And you probably won't ever do that. You're probably not wrong by saying that. But under different circumstances, by accident, whatever, by negligence, by being mad at your child and just putting them upstairs in the room, but then you forgot you left like a 4-foot ladder there, and they jump off and land on their head the wrong way. Does that make you an awful person, or does that make that just an accident? But, you know what I mean? So shit can happen, okay? And then the media could twist that on you. Point is, by thinking you're different than someone who did awful things, you are ignorant. You are in ignorance. You don't want to believe that that's true, or even worse, you just aren't aware or educated that that's not true. That under different circumstances, and if reincarnation and all this shit is real, then there's a really good chance that the soul that is inhabiting your body right now, that's giving you life force, or where life force filters through and actually gives this physical body its energy, however you want to look at it, that the soul that was in someone prior, you probably were oppressed, and you were probably the oppressor before as well. Okay, so to think that you can't do these things when you probably already did, in a manner of speaking, is being ignorant, being a hypocrite. So those are like the extreme ways, but the simpler ways are just start writing a list of all the things you think are bad that maybe you don't like, or people. If Jordan Peterson is somebody who bugs you, but you never really looked at it, but you heard a lot of bad things, maybe start looking at his stuff. And it'll probably help you more than anything. That's not necessarily dark side stuff. That's more like pet peeves. But I want to talk about the things that scare you. If you're scared of spiders, I'm not saying to go put a spider on your arm. Start looking at pictures of spiders. Start doing research in your area, what kind of spiders you have, and see if they are dangerous to you. And, that'll help you get over your fears and embrace that fear. I don't like bees. I fucking hate bees. But all this weekend I was doing work outside, drywall stuff, that I had bees around me, crawling on me, and I would still instinctively sometimes run away, and, but for the most part, if I was remembering it, I would just sit there and not worry, and I never got stung once. There was really no danger whatsoever. My kids were there, beers around them, freaked me out, but I would calm it, hone it in, not lose my shit, and everything worked out. Everything was fine. Nothing bad happened. So those are small examples. Like I said, when I first started in this, okay, fear-based media scared me. All the bad things scared me. But I fast and realized that those things probably aren't real. And even if they are, it's exaggerated and stuff like that. So those weren't fears. But the biggest fear I had, like I said, was spirits. And I just got into magic. So there was no way I could keep going on this path. Divination, Ouija board always scared me when I was a kid. I wouldn't even sleep in my bedroom. Picture of a clown, couldn't sleep in my bedroom. There's different things that happened to me as a kid. Like I said, I know now it's because I've seen certain things. But anyways, I had to explore that. I had to get on board with that. I had to figure that out. I had to see certain things. I had to force myself to do certain things, and to realize that, watch certain things, and, realize that just because something, I saw in a Hollywood movie about a spirit, and then I get this sleep paralysis, and I get this dark figure on me, it doesn't mean it's an evil dark figure, like I said. It doesn't mean it's an evil entity, right? And as soon as I realized that, and I got on board with that, and the next time it happened, I didn't freak out. It never happened again. Now, like I said, I still get the sleep paralysis. I still get that like electricity feeling, but it's not even close to as intense. And I never, ever get the evil pictures that I got. Like I said, the first time was like an evil shadow figure. And when I thought that was scary, well, the next time I had the sleep paralysis, which was in the same night, I just kept waking up over and over again within the dream until the last time I was actually awake. But then my wife was trying to kill me. Then my wife had red eyes, you know what I mean? It made things scary to me. But how do I know her having red eyes was scary? How do I know whenever she was on top of me, choking me, was a bad thing? I mean, that seems like a pretty bad thing. Point is, my mind made things worse and worse and worse. And then once I realized that they weren't bad, then boom. And the depolarization will help you. And, the fact that I'm having a second dark night of the soul, which I don't think most people talk about, but maybe they're just suppressing it or not. But the fact that I'm having it tells me that I'm probably not depolarized as much as possible. Because, or I still have programming I got to work on, and they're both kind of go around the same kind of idea that, if you are polarized, and I was polarized against working, right? Watching all the shit saying people make more money not working a job, doing things online while they sleep by a proctor. So I had this idea that, not only did I not want to work, not only did I want to stay home with my daughter and all this shit, not only was the last experience at a job really bad and shitty, but I have all these other things saying there's a better way, find your passion and purpose and all this. So I kept thinking, if I go get a job, I'm never going to find my passion and purpose. I'm going to be a slave to the system. Another thing that was prevalent in my head was the fact that we're all slaves working for the man and this monetary system is fake and all this. So as much as I thought I was depolarized, I was still polarized to all those ideas. And, and it's beyond me how I was able to get that money, but by having these notions. So by going back to work and actively saying and, understanding that this time I'm not doing it because when I left work last time, I just started and like I said, New Age. So, I was talking to a lot of guys that were also looking at the same things, thinking we're slaves and the whole alien shit and all this stuff, thinking we're slaves in the system. And if it wasn't for my kids, I wouldn't be here and all this. And then I stopped working there. But now I'm going back and it's like, I put the idea in my head, well, maybe that was a slavery I had to do. Back to that same idea that maybe in a past life, I was slaving somebody. Maybe, I was a slave and then the next time I was the person oppressing and owning slaves more than I was a slave. So maybe that's why I'm working now. Maybe the people that aren't working right now had more times being the slave. You know what I mean? And that's why they have, maybe it's just a whole karmic imbalance. But by going back to work actively, I'm doing it for me, for my family. I'm doing it as a sacrifice now to the gods to tell them, you know what? I love yous. I appreciate everything you're already giving me. And now I'm going to let someone else pay me instead of you guys. I'm going to keep giving you offerings and asking you for certain things that I think I need. But for the most part, I'm not going to ask for money until I have a worthwhile goal and I think I'm truly prepared for that I can get. I'm still going to ask for this and that to help me deprogram and things for my kids and health and all this. But when it comes to money, I did that enough. I've gotten what I got. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to work actively towards this goal. If I start slipping, then, you stop taking it away. But this way I can keep paying for my stuff. It's not to the gods to keep giving me the shit I need to pay my bills. I'm a man. I have to take the responsibility on. I have a family. You can say, well, doing magic is you taking responsibility, but not if I'm just getting it out of thin air or just by, not chance, but what people would say is chance, by circumstance and all that, right? I gotta do it a better way, and if I don't know exactly what my passion is yet, well, it's because I still have some work to do. I still have some inner work to do. If I don't know exactly what I want, I have a bunch of things I love doing that I could see myself doing. But to just pick one or not be able to put them all together or whatever, that's my issue. And ultimately, the one thing I do know that I think would be super fulfilling and I think I may be good at is what I said, was the whole child ADD, ADHD, and autistic stuff, having, taking care of these kids that nobody wants, the people that no one can take care of, or because their liabilities or they're too hard, or they have to hire extra staff. Well, I would like to do that. But for that, I need to know a little bit about psychology. I need to know a little bit about the mind. So I'm doing that while I'm working and paying my bills. I need to, I'm probably going to need to take some first aid and different things like that in case stuff goes wrong. I might need to take, an early childhood education course or, something to that effect. So I have credentials for this. I may have to there may be a bunch of things I have to do. So I have to keep working to pay my bills. And then hopefully if the gods think this is a worthy task, then I can keep asking for these things to get paid for. Because I'm not going to be, I don't want to say I'm not good at saving, because I'm hoping that's something I can program in my mind, have the discipline to do. But to just have a big pile of money in the bank that could, be taken or stolen or whatever is probably not good. So as things happen, such as, okay, well, Corey, you're going to need this to do that. Okay, I get the money for it. I do it on my weekends or I do it on my spare time, and then it's done. Okay, what's the next step? Keep doing these steps, using my magic to do those steps. That's kind of what I mean by this process. But if I don't go through the dark nights of soul and don't realize that, I can be a dangerous person. I'm a dangerous being, if I'm going to have 3 kids here that can potentially drive me mad and something bad could happen. You know what I mean? I need to understand these things, and everybody does, especially if they're a parent or a deal in a very stressful circumstance or place. So you need to, probably read some specific books about that. But the best way I think you should is to identify your fears, identify the things that you were told to fear or the things you were told were bad, bad that you've been suppressing and not doing and not looking at. And by openly looking at those things, things are going to get unlocked. You're either going to realize they're not as bad as people thought, and that's going to help you be depolarized in a bigger sense. Like I said, Manson's not as bad as most people give him credit for. That was huge for me because, like I said, up until I don't even know, 10 years ago, I still would avoid his videos, but if one was on, I couldn't help but look at it. And then the reason for that is, he was dark. He was this image of evil that was placed into my mind via programming. And your body, your dark side craves that. We're both positive and negative make up our energy. That's the electricity going around. Push, pull. But that negative also craves that negative stuff, and the positive craves the positive stuff. That's why you can both, in the same day, maybe even in the same hour, see something beautiful and then see something that's like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. That is disgusting. That is pure evil incarnate. And then you'll be like, this world is both beautiful and bad. That's why we have yin yang symbols. A little bit of good and bad, a little bit of bad and good. I mean, that's what the whole thing's about. But you're drawn to that. And by keep suppressing that, no, be positive. No, be positive. It's not good. It's not good. You need to, in a controlled environment, hopefully, where you can control the variables, in case it's very emotional or something bad happens or whatever the case is, or you freak out, because you don't want this to happen by accident somewhere. Like I said, as a trigger or something happened to you, and you've just been taking it all in, and bad stuff keeps happening over and over again, and then some asshole at work does something to you, and then you just lose it, and you hit him with the first thing that you grab, or you say something you regret, and then you make a bad thing even worse, and you lose your job or whatever the case is. So that's the benefits of doing this, and that's how I would think you should slowly get into the dark night of the soul / shadow side of yourself. It's all the things that you've either suppressed, you don't know you suppressed, which is why a lot of people tell you to go see a psychiatrist. And if you can't, watch Peterson take his classes online, which means, if they actually take his classes, watch his lectures where he's in the class. But watch his dark night of the soul stuff, his young stuff there, his shadow work stuff. But, look up all the information. There's a lot of bullshit out there about it, but there's a lot of good information about it too. And, they might give you other things that may or may not help you, but then something might spark in your head. But I truly think if you make a list of your fears and then all the things you can remember as a child you were told were bad. Like I said, The Simpsons were bad and South Park were bad when I was a kid, right? Parents weren't allowed to let us watch that. But I never thought they were bad. So that's not something. But when it came to Manson, yeah, it was something I thought was bad. Just like the pentagram. I thought the pentagram was bad. I know the upside down way was the face of a devil, and the right side up way was still a bad thing, right? No matter what. But I used to draw it as a kid, thinking it was cool in places when people didn't know I was drawing it. But I thought it was a bad symbol, and I was doing it because of that. My dark soul, my shadow side, craves that darkness. I wanted to, because like one of the first factory jobs I had, I used to put the anarchy symbol somewhere, thinking it would piss off people. I used to put the star somewhere. I remember one guy there who was a history buff, self-proclaimed history buff, said, because I put the star there, and everybody was going around saying, oh, it's the devil side. Who's a devil worshiper here? Blah, 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 blah. And I was this clean-cut, preppy-looking fuck. But I did skateboard and listen to metal music, but for the most part, for jobs, I would dress like that because my parents told me, and, society at that time wouldn't hire people with tattoos and who looked bad. Well, some places would, but it wasn't very popular. So people never thought it was me. But that one guy came up to me and was like, that's so anti-Semitic. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? I think it was like 19 or 18. And he's just like, he's like, that's a Jewish symbol. It has nothing to do with what people think, devil worship and all that. And then he's got the anarchy symbol there, which is, against. And then I didn't do the swastika, but then there's a swastika there as well. And that's what he was kind of saying. Is like the swastika with the Star of David for like the Judaism. He's like, it just doesn't even make sense. This is just somebody who doesn't know anything, who thinks it's cool or whatever. And I was like, holy fuck. That was probably the last time I was doing that, but I used to do that in high school, in my books and everywhere, thinking it was cool symbols. Point is, this is something I used to fear me that I never thought I would wear. And then I still get looks whenever I'm fucking wearing it from people thinking, but you gotta embrace that, this black and white magic thing. If that's something that scares you, I don't want to do black magic. I don't want to do baneful magic and all that. Well, you need to go watch someone like Birch who explains why it would be important to hex people or curse people. How, so if you get hexed back or cursed back, just look at it. You don't have to do it, but look at it, okay? Because black magic, all it is using the moon at the right time. But the fact that they call it white and black magic, and Birch has said this, so it's probably where I got the idea, but it's like a play on, black people's magic is bad and white people's magic is good. It might be just a racist thing at the same time, because hoodoo is prominently, something that African Americans in the States or wherever, maybe Asian, whatever, were doing, right? And that was their magic. And then Hollywood came around and turned hoodoo into voodoo, which takes the same concepts but makes it on an evil twist. Making a hoodoo doll would be yourself, giving yourself things. By manipulating this doll on your altar, you would be manipulating your reality to give you things. Whereas Hollywood changed it to voodoo with a V instead of an H. And now you're doing this to your enemies, making it all bad. And then, white magic was whatever. Point is, there's baneful magic, and then there's you doing things to make yourself better and helping your transformation process using hermetic principles. But you don't want to be doing, malicious magic. But you should look at it. You should see what's going on. I'm not saying to buy books with evil sigils and then, bad things happen to you. But don't be scared to dive in there. That you oppress it so much that when something bad happens to you, then all of a sudden you say, fuck it. And you get all the bad books you can get your hands on. And then you have all these dark books with dark sigils. And then you start having issues in your house with demonic entities. Or you even decide to make a pact with a specific demonic entity. And you can't take it back. When something happens and the person that was you pissed off at apologizes to you, makes better, and then say, oh, fuck, what did I do? You know what I mean? And you're fucked. Don't do that. Go and look at this shit while you have a sound mind, while you're as depolarized as possible, and just get the info you need, get whatever you need in this way whenever you're in that dark place. You know how bad this shit can be so that you don't make those mistakes. To me, that's what your shadow work could be. Unfortunately, most of the time, it gets sprung onto you because of circumstances. However, it gets sprung onto you, I believe anyways, whenever things aren't too bad. It's the beginning, and if you can recognize it, then you can basically counter it and do something good about it and inform yourself so that when things get really bad, and you've been, no, I'm not in my dark night of soul. Things are just, things just turn around and you just keep suppressing, and then all of a sudden you can't suppress it anymore. And then bad shit happens. So don't do that. Don't do that, okay? Take the advice, okay? Next time we'll go over divination a little bit better, but I got to get ready for work because it's almost 1 now. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the show. I videotaped it, so if I said some things and talked about how I was doing specific symbols, or you see me do something like that, and you're wondering, that's because I recorded it, and I may put the videos up on YouTube as well. It'll be like 4 videos, I believe, 4 or 5. But anyways, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you have a great fucking day. Ceremonial Witch out.
It's unlocked. And so then what that would imply is that if you got to the point where you could look at the darkest things, so that would be the abyss, right? That would be the deepest abyss. If you could look at the harshest things, like the most brutal parts of the suffering of the world and the malevolence of people and society, if you could look at that straight and directly, that would turn you on maximally. And so that's the idea of rescuing your father, because imagine that you're like the potential composite of all the ancestral wisdom that's locked inside of you biologically. But that's not going to come out at all unless you stress yourself, unless you challenge yourself. And the bigger the challenge you take on, the more that's going to turn on. And so that as you take on a broader and broader range of challenges and you push yourself harder, then more and more of what you could be turns on, and that's equivalent to transforming yourself into the ancestral father, because you're like the, what would you call it? You're the consequence of all these living beings that have come before you, and that's all part of your biological potentiality. And then if you can push yourself, then all of that clicks on, and that turns you into who you could be. That's the re-representation of that positive ancestral father. So that's why you rescue your father from the belly of the beast.
So you think that this ultimate goal of sacrifice and of risking your life in order to save someone who's truly important to you, that this somehow or another maximizes your potential as a human being?
Well, I think you can think about it religiously too. So think about it this way. So in the Christian story, for example, you have Christ does 2 things that are messianic. One is takes the suffering of the world onto himself. Okay, so that's a weird idea. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's think about it psychologically. Well, maybe it means that, that's your job. Is the world's full of suffering, and you should accept that as your responsibility, past, present, and future. You're supposed to do something about that, as much as you can about it. And maybe you start with your own localized suffering, put yourself together, but then you expand that outward and you decide that you're not a victim of that, even though, you're part and parcel of it, but you're the potential solution to that. And so you accept that as a responsibility. So that's part of taking on a load. That's part of bearing a cross. You could look at it that way. The cross is sort of a symbol of the place of maximal suffering. Okay, so you accept that as a challenge, not as something that you're victimized by. Maybe you accept that as the price of being. Okay, so that's one responsibility. You're responsible for addressing the suffering in the world. So that could give you some meaning, seems to me. And then the next thing is, there's a story, of course, that Christ met the devil in the desert. And so that's the encounter with malevolence. So that would be the other thing, because the two major problems that people face, obviously, are suffering, tragedy, and malevolence. And so that's the other thing that you're responsible for, is that you're supposed to look at the capacity for human evil as clearly as you possibly can, which is a very terrifying thing. That causes post-traumatic stress disorder in people that aren't accustomed to it. And in the mythology that's associated with the encounter with evil, it's almost always the case that the entity that does the encountering, even if it does it voluntarily, is hurt by it. So the Egyptian god Horus, for example, who's the eye and the falcon, the thing that can see and pay attention, when he encounters his evil uncle, Seth, who's the precursor of Satan, he loses an eye. Because it's no joke to encounter malevolence. It can really shake you. But the idea would be that if you can face the malevolence and you can face the suffering, then that opens the door to your maximal potential. And then the optimistic part of that is, and this is why it's so useful to peer into the darkness, let's say, the optimistic part of that is that although the suffering is great and the malevolence is deep, your capacity to transcend it is stronger. So what you get out of the most negative viewpoint is the most positive possible consequence. Because one of the things you'd like to know, if you wanted to know something deep about yourself, is that you could face the worst that there was and prevail. And I believe that people are capable of that. I think that despite how tragic life is and how malevolent things are, that fundamentally our spirit, let's say, has the capacity to confront that and to fix it, like psychologically, so to confront it courageously, to be able to bear up under that if you do it voluntarily, but also to address it. Not only to deal with it psychologically, but to deal with it practically. And that we could make things much better.
There's always a striving towards utopia, right? Like this is the ultimate goal, that if you ask people, what would you like out of civilization? Well, I'd like everyone to be happy and everyone to get along and there to be no war, nothing, no suffering, no anything. But in order to really, truly learn about yourself and about life, you have to overcome adversity. You have to experience things. And I firmly believe that in order to truly appreciate love, you have to understand and really have felt hate. And to really appreciate camaraderie, you have to feel loneliness. So this is just a part of being a person, for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, maybe, see, the other thing that I've been thinking along the same lines is that, it isn't... So in the biblical stories, in the Abrahamic stories, for example, Abraham basically hangs around his dad's tent till he's like 80. He's one of these guys that fails to launch, in a big way. And God eventually gets sick and tired of him, playing video games in his basement, and says, get the hell out there into the world and have a life. And so he does. He leaves his father's tent and his community and his country, which is what he's commanded to do. And then he goes out and has an adventure. But, the first thing he encounters is a famine, and then he encounters a tyranny, and then he encounters a bunch of people in the tyrannical state that want to take his wife. And so you can imagine that Abraham's response to that is like, it was a hell of a lot better sitting in my dad's tent playing video games. But what's cool about that story, what I realized when I was doing the lectures on it last year, was that was a call to adventure. And that the right way of conceptualizing what we're talking about isn't that utopia would be a place where everyone was happy. Because and I think because of what you just laid out, is you need that polarity, and people need a load, and we need adversity, and we need difficulty. We need all of that. So maybe what you want is an adventure, the greatest adventure that you could have. And that would involve, something to push against. It would involve real challenge. And so just see, Dostoevsky knew this, because when he wrote Notes from Underground, which I would highly recommend to everyone who's listening, it's a great book and it's a very short book. He criticized socialist utopia back in like 1860, way before it became the sort of widespread idea that it is now. And what Dostoevsky said was that, well, human beings are these very peculiar creatures, and if you gave us a utopia so that we had nothing to do but eat cake and busy ourselves with the continuation of the species, that was his line, that the first thing we do is smash it all to bits just so that something unexpected and troublesome would happen, because we're built for adventure and not for peace and happiness.
Well, we're designed to overcome the natural world. The natural world is filled with that. The natural world is filled with things trying to eat things. And this is just everywhere you look, that's all you observe. You observe predators and prey and animals eating vegetables, and that's it. And I think that this concept of overcoming adversity is so human. It's so a part of what we are that I want to bring it back to you. Because one of the things that I've been considering is that I've said this many times, and I just had a conversation with my good friend Steve Brunella the other day where he brought it up independently. He said, I think Jordan Peterson is the most misunderstood and misinterpreted guy in the world. He's like, people are always like, not just misinterpreting, but misstating what you believe and misstating what you say. This opposition to you, this, like we were talking about this GQ interview, which I thought was... I thought that woman was far more intelligent than and her approach was far better and far more reasoned and well thought out than some of the other attacks on you before. So they're bringing in the varsity level players is what I'm saying. It's like, but I think this is important. I think this is part of what forges this message is that you are, and and this is one of the things that Eric Weinstein and I had said about you, is that you're essentially the Hoist Gracie of the intellectual dark web. If you don't know what that means, is the early days of the UFC, no one knew what the best martial art was. And the idea was like there was all these martial arts that are running around independently, and they were all claiming that they had the best technique, and let's see what happens. And Hoist Gracie was the one who represented jiu-jitsu and went out there and beat all these people with superior technique and superior strategy.
South American?
Yes, he's from Brazil.
Brazil, yeah, okay. I know about him, yeah.
And he launched this and his family launched this Brazilian jiu-jitsu empire that has since taken over the world of martial arts. But you are the one who's consistently engaging these people. You're the one who's involved in these Vale Tudo events where you're debating these people who are coming at you hostile with notes. And I think as uncomfortable as those moments are, like, who was the woman that said, so what you're trying to say is...
Yeah, Kathy Newman.
Yeah, I think her approach... I think she misunderestimated you. I think she underestimated you. I think she misinterpreted who you are, and she thought that she could come at you with this straw man sort of article and argument rather, and frame your positions in a very unflattering way. It just didn't work.
No.
It was like the early days of Hoist Gracie. Guys would come at him flailing and he'd get him in an arm bar and they'd tap out and they'd go, fuck. That's kind of what happened with you. But now this woman who you had this conversation with in GQ, she was much more skilled.
Yeah.
She was better verbally.
Yeah.
Her arguments made more sense.
Yeah.
She seemed more reasonable, more well-read.
Yeah.
She was able to think on her feet quicker. But still, these are really important conversations.
Well, it was a funny day because I went to the hotel room in Baltimore, and I went out of my way to do it, and she was hostile to me the second I walked into the room.
Really?
Yes, and that really kind of put me off.
How so?
Well, she basically told me that we were going to have a war, not so many words, but just there was a coldness to her and a distaste for me that was sort of radiating from her. So she was animus possessed from a Jungian perspective. That's the right way of thinking about it. One of the ways of thinking about that is that she had a chip on her shoulder in relationship to me. So she'd already formulated who I was in her imagination.
Right.
And it was also maybe a form of projection. So like I was the embodiment of all the things that she found distasteful. And that's who she was. So there was no willingness to consider on her part that I could be different than her preconceptions of me, right? And so she was hostile to me in the way that you would be if you were prejudiced against someone right from the beginning. And so by the time it was uncomfortable in the room, and by the time, and there was a photo shoot, and so by the time the conversation started, I was more impatient than I would normally be, because one of the things that I do expect from journalists, and Kathy Newman was like this, by the way, and so have some of the other people that have gone after me, at least they had the professionalism to be civil before the interview started.
Right.
You know, like because there's a certain amount of politeness, I would say, that not that I'm owed, but that someone you're interviewing is owed if they come out of their way to go talk to you.
It's just human decency.
Yes,
there's no real conflict, right? Until you have this conflict, it's just hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Two human beings interacting with each other.
Yes, on relatively
Socially,
professional.
yes.
Well, even just professional, right? Even just professional grounds. It's like, well, we're both here to do a job, and I've agreed to come, but no, there was palpable enmity in the air right to begin with, and you know, when I actually thought at the end of that interview, I thought, geez, you know, maybe I've done enough interviews, because I found that I was more impatient than I would have liked to have been. Now, luckily, it doesn't seem to have gone overboard, because I've been watching the comments on that GQ interview, and I think it's got about 4.5 million views, some ridiculous number of views. And people have said that I was more impatient and a little harsher than usual, which I think is true. And I thought, God, you know, maybe I'm starting to run out of patience, which isn't good, right?
Right.
I don't want to run out of patience.
Because then it will flavor the message that you're putting out there.
Definitely.
And people will take it in the wrong way, and they'll take it in with that bitterness.
Yes, exactly. Well, and, you know, one of the things that I think is very important is that you don't become resentful. Like, and you know, when I'm on this tour, for example, like, there's no resentment for me. Because you think, well, you might think, well, this is a lot of work, and I've been running around like mad, and you know, it takes a lot of organization, and it's quite demanding, and all of that, and that's all true, and that none of that is a complaint. And I decided with Tammy right at the beginning that, well, first of all, that this was going to be work and not a vacation, because we're not stupid. We know you can't have everything at the same time if you have any sense. You're lucky if you get some things that are good at once, you know. So we're very grateful to have that opportunity, and that I was going to continue to do this as long as I was thrilled to be in front of the audience, and then when I meet people afterwards, that I'm not looking at the end of the line to see when the night ends, you know, because I want to be sure that every single person that comes to meet me, I'm, you know, present for. Absolutely, because I am actually quite taken aback and thrilled, I guess is the right word. Grateful. That's better. That they're there. It's like, God, man, some of these people, you know, like they're coming from all over the place. You know, people fly in from Australia into Europe. They've flown. Lots of Eastern Europeans came to England. In fact, they're making huge treks. There was guys who came from like they took them like 12 hours to get through Russia to come to Finland to watch the talk there. You know, and then not just a few people like that. People are really going way the hell out of their way. You know, and then they line up, and it's not inexpensive, because these venues are expensive and all of that. And I'm doing, and it's the same with the damn interviews. It's like I'm doing my best to not take any of this for granted and not get annoyed about it. And that goes for the conflict too. It's like, well, you know, I've tried to have my agent screen out maybe the more egregious interviews, you know, the ones that would just be nothing but combat, because I find them quite stressful, though I wouldn't say I'm hiding from them. But you don't know, to begin with, how an interview is going to go, and I could just say, well, I'm done having interviews for a while. But I can't help but see that the conflict is a necessary part of this, even though I don't find it pleasant. Like, people think, they accuse me of being a provocateur, of enjoying the conflict. It's actually not true at all. I don't enjoy it at all. It usually takes me about 3 days to recover from a particularly contentious interview. You know, because I find conflict, interpersonal conflict, quite stressful.
Yes.
You know, but I think
everyone does.
Yes.
And to pretend you're either a sociopath or you're a liar.
Yes. Well, there are people who seem to enjoy that kind of intellectual combat. You know, that they and the political types are more like that. But
but I think they still afterwards feel it, and if they read the comments and people are against them, it's just that unease. It carries.
Well, you would think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how people deal with it, because I mean, I've been fortunate, because although, you know, I've had a fair bit of negative press coverage, the comments on YouTube in particular, which is where the bulk of them are, and I would say among the general public, have been overwhelmingly positive. I don't know what the hell it would be like to be in a world where that was reversed, where the majority of people are against you.
I've seen it. I've seen it happen with guests that I've had on the show, where I've met them afterwards, and you see a physical effect on them. You see them beaten down, like, Jesus Christ, those comments are so mean. I'm like, you can't read those. You can't read those. And you see how it's affecting them. Like, they can't sleep. They read it. Yeah. It fucks with them. They'll stay up for nights. It's not good. It's you're taking in all of these opinions of hundreds, if not thousands, of people that you don't even know. You don't know if they're coming from a healthy place, and most of those opinions, they would not express it that way if they were talking. Even if they could get the same message across, like, I think you were ignorant to these facts. I think you're biased in your perceptions. Even if they had an opinion that was unflattering, the way that to express it to you, they'd be considerate about you and your feelings as a human being. And if they weren't, you wouldn't take into consideration what they're saying, because this guy's just an asshole. But when you just see it in type, we just see print. It just doesn't. It could be a smart person. It could be a psycho. It could be a fool. It could be anything.
Well, it's also funny too, because the negative comments that are part of social media seem to be just as potent as negative comments in real life, but the positive comments don't seem to be as positive as the positive comments in real life. And they don't seem as real. And I guess that's partly because we're wired, to be more sensitive to threat and to negative emotion, because we can be hurt.
Well, it's also healthy too to not stroke your ego too much. If you're just concentrating only on the like there's something distasteful if you go to someone's page and they just retweet all the positive things that people say to them, because then it has this sort of reinforcing side. Like, people know that if I say something really positive to Jordan, he's going to retweet me. Like, there are some people that they engage in this sort of commerce. Like, you say something positive, they retweet you, and it's a little too strokey, People get really into that, stroking their own back.
Well, I guess the danger of that is that possibility of that ego inflation that you really want to avoid, because that's a bad idea. That's a very bad idea.
Well, you've done a wonderful job of avoiding those waters, because this is for a guy who's in his 50s, who becomes famous out of nowhere, and doesn't just become famous, but becomes this culturally significant sort of lightning rod. I mean, that's how I view you, and a lot of these talks that you're doing, a lot of these debates like you're having with this woman at GQ, or some of your interviews. What you're doing is you're expressing yourself in a brave but very controversial way, and a lot of people are paying attention to this, but then you're backing it up with your research, you're backing it up with real science, you're backing up with a tremendous amount of history of the human race and of religion and of the scientific studies that have been done that show correlations between different types of behaviors in human beings, and all this is rich. It's very rewarding if you could take it all in, but when it goes against what people have, their preconceived notions or their own set of beliefs that they're bringing to your conversations, to your debates, then it creates this hostile battle where what you're saying is very contrary to the way they've been living their life, or these preset patterns of behavior.
Really saw that in Scandinavia. Yeah, well, I was there. I went to Stockholm twice, and Oslo twice, and Helsinki twice, and Copenhagen once in the last month, and I spent there was a lot of interviews, and a lot of discussion about the so-called gender paradox. And that's a very interesting thing, because it's really put their tails in a knot in Scandinavia. And that makes sense, because the Scandinavians are going to have to deal with this first, because they've gone the farthest down the road for making their society gender equal.
But explain that to people.
Yeah,
they don't.
I will. Okay, so imagine, first of all, that there's two kinds of equality that you might pursue. One would be equality of opportunity, and so that would mean that there's wide range of talent across people, regardless of their type, whatever that might be: sex, gender, race, ethnicity. There's talent distributed everywhere, and it's a kind of a truism, and I would say a truism of the West in the deepest sense, that each of the individuals within those groups should be put in a position where their talents they're encouraged to manifest those talents, partly because that would be good for them spiritually and psychologically, but also because that would be of obvious benefit to the community. Right? I mean, talent's rare, which people don't understand. There's lots of different kinds of talent, but in each domain it's rare. And so it's to everyone's benefit to exploit talented people to the maximal possible degree. So even if you're just selfish, you want to push for equality of opportunity, because the more talented people there are out there, the more cool stuff you get to have, and hopefully the more diverse and interesting your life is. So you can pursue equality of opportunity policies, and the Scandinavians have done that, especially trying to knock down barriers for women in the workplace. And by all accounts, by all standard theories, the Scandinavian countries and places like the Netherlands, Canada to a slightly lesser degree, have gone farther than any other countries in pursuing those policies. Okay, and part of the consequence of that is that some of the differences between men and women have been minimized. So obviously there's far more women in the workplace than there were 40 years ago. And in many occupations, there's actually dominance by women. There's dominance in the universities. There's dominance in the healthcare fields. And so women have poured into the workplace. And hypothetically, there's problems with that because it's put a lot of stress on family structure. But hypothetically, that's for the best. And because it gives people a broader range of choices and it gives everyone access to more talent. So, and then also, if you look around the world, you see that one of the best predictors of the probability of economic development in developing countries is the attitude in those countries towards equal rights for women. And it looks causal. The more positively the country is predisposed to female rights, the more likely they are to develop economically. And maybe that's because that indicates that they're open to new ideas or something like that, or open to transformation. So, okay, so that's one kind of equality. Open up the playing field so that everybody has a chance to compete and cooperate and land where they will. But then the other kind of equality is equality of outcome. So, and that's often described as equity in today's language. And so the ultimate equity utopia would be take every job, every conceivable kind of job, and then stratify that by every conceivable level of authority within every job. And then ensure that every single category of person is represented in precise proportion to their prevalence in the population. So every job should be 50% women and 50% men, and say 13% non-Western ethnic minority, whatever that happens to be, and then you could break that down. And otherwise there's evidence of systemic prejudice. Okay, now, first thing about that is that's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because there's no limit to the number of ways that you can categorize people into groups. So, you know about sex and ethnicity and race, maybe those are the obvious ones, but now you have gender, and then you have ethnicity, and, and then there's attractiveness and intelligence and temperament and height and age and socioeconomic background. And I mean, let's say there's 20, but there's a lot more than that. There's no possible way that you could ever regulate a society so tightly that every single one of those groups was equally represented in every single one of those occupations at every single level of the hierarchy. That is
so they
impossible.
Want to concentrate on the significant ones, which are men and women and race.
Well, yeah, but who's to say those are the significant ones? That's the other thing. It isn't even obvious that they are, because I would say that like a more significant one is cognitive ability, because that's a way bigger predictor of long-term life success than sex or race. So I don't even think that we've necessarily identified the canonical groups. We've just decided that gender and race are maybe they're the most obvious.
Right, but isn't there a problem is that people don't, that what they don't do is they don't take in terms of cognitive ability, they don't get on a team. They don't get on, like, there's people that are sexist.
Yeah.
But it's very rare that someone is elitist in terms of their cognitive ability.
Well, hard to say, Joe. I mean, I think one of the reasons that...
I shouldn't say elitist. Prejudiced is a better word.
I don't know. You could be right. But look, I think one of the reasons that... Like, here's something that's kind of peculiar.
It doesn't even make sense now that I'm thinking about it. Of course they are.
There's one thing that's quite peculiar about the United States in that regard. It's like most working class people, let's say, are far more irritated with the intellectual elite than they are with the wealthy elite. And that's because they think they could become wealthy. And they could. But they don't think they could become part of the intellectual elite. And it isn't obvious to me that the intellectual elite, so those would be the liberal left-leaning types that dominate the media and academia, are particularly positive in their attitudes towards the typical working class person. I think they're prejudiced and elitist. I do believe that that's the case. And I think they're also, what would you call it, patronizing. And I think that the typical working class person, say, who voted for Trump is very, very sensitive to that. And so they're much more concerned with the 1% who are the cognitive elite than they are the 1% who are the economic elite. Because at least they think that's a game they could play. So, anyways.
Isn't that also because there's caricatures, right, of the 1% of the economic elite? You just think of people that are in these lofty positions that are in control of the financial institutions. But the 1% of the intellectual elite, you think of in terms of like some of the more preposterous things you're hearing out of universities now and safe spaces and...
Oh yeah, there's that too.
Yeah.
And there's that too. There's no appreciation on the part of the intellectual elite for the pathologies of rationalism.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing stupider than a smart person who went wrong. You know, like you can tangle, and I've seen this in my clients, you know, frequently. Like, if I have a particularly smart client who's particularly disordered in their personality, that's often so difficult. It's almost unimaginable because they're so good at rationalizing, for example.
What is your approach to handling someone like that, who's like super intelligent, but yet completely their life is in disarray?
Well, you know, I usually take a very practical approach. Like, you know, we try to identify, because I start always in my therapy practice, I always start with behavioral principles. It's like, okay, well, let's see if we can identify a few areas, you know, through negotiation that are really causing you grief and misery. You know, like what's wrong with your life as far as you're concerned. And so that often takes a lot of discussion. And then we might try to figure out what's causing that. And that's often very difficult to figure out too, because it might be something physical. You know, you might be sick in some way, because lots of depression is autoimmune related, and anxiety can be a side effect of all sorts of physiological disorders, or eating improperly, or sleeping badly, or not exercising, you know, enough to kind of keep yourself regulated. So you try to figure out what's causing it, and then you try to sketch out some possible solution that we could both test. And then with the more intelligent ones, you know, often they can come up with all sorts of reasons why none of this is going to work, or 1,000 reasons why. Usually 1,000 reasons why none of this is going to work. And with people like that, sometimes it's useful to turn to their dreams if they dream, because one of the things that's cool about dreams is that even though they're hard to interpret, they never lie. And so sometimes you can take someone who's hyper rational and they'll have a dream and they'll tell you the dream, and then you can work through an interpretation, which is a tricky business. And the dream will tell them something, and there's just no denying it. It's like, well, it's a statement from nature. So what are you going to do? You're going to pretend that that's not the case? You know, so that's often extremely useful. Well, back to the equality issue. So here's what's happened. So psychologists have, and this is what's putting a tail, not in the tail of the Scandinavians, psychologists have come to a pretty decent agreement about standard personality models, right? So there's extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, openness, and conscientiousness. And they look fairly stable cross-culturally. And that was all done by asking thousands of people hundreds and hundreds of questions and then grouping them statistically. So it was atheoretical, basically. It took computational power and statistics to find out that these are how traits group. So extroverted people are sociable and happy, and neurotic people experience a fair bit of negative emotion. So that's the positive and negative emotion dimensions. Agreeable people are maternal, and disagreeable people are competitive, and there's a fair bit of male-female difference there. Conscientious people are dutiful and industrious and orderly, and the open people are creative. And so those are your basic 5 dimensions. Okay, so that's been established, and everyone more or less agrees on it. Now, maybe there's 7 dimensions, and we've got a questionnaire that breaks the 5 down into 10. That's called Understand Myself. But basically, there's good consensus on the 5. Okay, so now, as soon as you have the 5 basic traits, you can ask some questions like, well, do men and women differ? And so what you do is you just give the questionnaire, you can either fill it out yourself or have other people fill it out on your behalf. So, and it could be a teacher, it could be a parent, and that's all being done. And what you find is there are systematic differences between men and women. And the biggest differences are that women experience more negative emotion and that they're more agreeable than men. So, and that's borne out by the psychiatric evidence, because higher levels of negative emotion are manifested in depression and anxiety, and women are diagnosed with higher levels of depression and anxiety all around the world. And with agreeableness, that's also borne out by the clinical literature in some sense, the medical literature, socio-medical literature, because disagreeable people are more likely to be incarcerated, because it's the best predictor of being incarcerated, even though it's not a very good predictor, and men are incarcerated at about a 10-to-1 rate compared to women, and are more likely to be antisocial and conduct disordered. So the personality differences are mirrored in the socio-medical literature. Okay, so there are differences, but then there's a question. Are those differences a consequence of socialization, or are they biological? And the answer to that is tricky, because how much something is social and how much it is biological actually depends on the social circumstances. So, well, here's an example. If you have a society where no one has enough to eat and people are starving, then there's a huge cultural effect on people's intelligence, let's say, that's mediated by economic factors, even though it's got a biological origin, right, the starvation. So the relationship between biology and culture is actually partly culturally dependent, so it makes it complicated. But in any case, here's how the scientists decided to address this. They thought, well, why don't we rank order countries by how egalitarian their social policies are, which you can do with a fair degree of reliability. You put the countries where women are second-class citizens at the bottom, and you'd put the Scandinavian countries at the top. You can get good reliability across raters for how you'd rate those countries. And then look at the magnitude of the differences between men and women by the egalitarian social policies. And so then you'll find out, and here's the hypothesis. If the differences between men and women are primarily social, then as cultures become more egalitarian, men and women will become more alike. That's not what happened. The opposite happened. The more egalitarian the society, and it turns out the richer the society, because that's also being discovered now, the more different men and women become. And so the differences are not huge. So with agreeableness, for example, if you took the average man, if you took a typical man and a typical woman out of the population, just randomly, and you had to bet that the woman was more aggressive than the man, you'd be wrong 60% of the time. So there's quite a bit of overlap, right? Because you'd be right 40% of the time. But the problem is that a lot of selection takes place at the extremes. Maybe you're only concerned about disagreeable people when they become violent. And maybe it's only the 1 in 50 most disagreeable person who's violent. And they're all men. So you can have quite a bit of similarity at the average level and big differences at the extremes. And the extremes is where people do things like employment selection. So the biggest difference that's been discovered between men and women, and this is the one that gets biggest in the Scandinavian countries, is interest. Men are more interested in things, and women are more interested in people. And it's a big difference. It's 1 full standard deviation. So what that means is that if you were a man, you would have to be more interested in people than 85% of men to be as interested in people as the 50th percentile woman. And you'd have to be more interested in things than 85% of women to be as interested in things as the typical man.
And how do you define things? Objects?
Gadgets.
Okay.
Gadgets.
Oh,
things. Okay. Non-animate things.
Cars.
Yeah. Tools.
Yeah.
Technology. Right. STEM fields. Because the other thing that's happened is that the more egalitarian the society, the fewer women go into the STEM fields. The fewer.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So now this unravels in a big way. It's like this is a hugely relevant issue politically, because it means that you cannot have equality of opportunity and equality of outcome at the same time. It's not possible, because as you make your society more egalitarian and you open up the opportunity for equality of outcome, you increase how different men and women are, and that changes their occupational choice. So if men are more interested in things, which they are by a substantial margin, then way more of them are going to be engineers.
Wouldn't that possibly support this idea that an enforced model of equality would allow people to be themselves more? I mean, this is almost what you're saying.
Well,
that
is the optimistic viewpoint. Like, look, it's so funny because the Swedish foreign minister told me to go climb back under the rock that I came out from under when I was in Scandinavia, because I was describing this science.
I read that, but I'm not exactly sure why.
Well, she regards me as misogynist because I think that because I've been putting forward the evidence that there are genuine differences between men and women.
But she should be held accountable for that, because that's just a flippant thing to say. Like, you should have, especially in a position of power like she's in, you should have a very specific argument. Saying, like, for a leader to have such a base thing to say, such a crude, dumb thing to say, crawl back under the rock that you came from.
Yeah, well, I thought she was making a joke about lobsters, but I don't think she was.
The lobsters go under rocks? I guess they do. They grow in cracks.
Yeah, and the bigger lobsters have better rocks.
That was another very interesting thing in the GQ thing, where the woman was challenging you on your neurobiology, your neurochemistry, understanding.
Yes. Well, hardly any psychologists understand that serotonin is associated with hierarchies. It's like a truism. It's been known for 30 years. So
we can definitely get back to that, but I'm very curious about this, because this idea of enforced equality, right? Ensuring that there is such a high emphasis placed on equality, that you have the equal amount of men and the equal amount of women, and the opportunities are absolutely available as much to women as they are to men. This is enforced. That this creates an environment where there's less resistance. Perhaps women don't feel, I'll show you.
Yeah, that is what seems to happen.
This is
here's an example. So there are fewer women mathematicians in the higher echelons. Okay, but here's something interesting about mathematical ability. First of all, it's very rare, so that's the first thing to keep in mind. Now, it looks like, if you look in junior high, that mathematically gifted men and males and females are approximately as common. Now, there's a little bit of debate about that, because there is some evidence that maybe at the very upper extremes there's a male advantage, just like there's a male disadvantage at the low end, because the male distribution for intelligence might be flatter. And so that's the greater male variability hypothesis. There's been papers putting that forward that have been retracted as a consequence of pressure from politically correct people, even though greater male variability is actually quite common in the animal kingdom for a variety of reasons. Men are more expendable, that males are more expendable in some ways, or you could say that males are more likely to pursue high-risk, high-return strategies. You can look at it either way, and it's certainly possible. In any case, the males in junior high who happen to be mathematically gifted are less likely to also be verbally gifted, whereas that doesn't seem to be the case for the females. And so if you're a male math nerd, then math is a pretty logical pathway for you, because you don't have as many other options. Whereas if you're a female math nerd, you have other options, because you're more likely to also be verbally gifted. And so that's enough to, at least in principle, account for some of the reason why there are fewer women mathematicians than men mathematicians.
They have other options.
They have other options. And there's lots of complex reasons like this. And so we have this reflexive idea, and this is very much the case, because this is like the core idea among the feminist neo-Marxist types, is that if there's differences in outcome, that's proof of prejudice. And that's support for the idea of the patriarchal tyranny. And that's like the core axiom of the radical left, is the patriarchal tyranny, as far as I'm concerned. That's God for them, the patriarchal tyranny. It's like, well, if it turns out that many of these differences in outcome between men and women aren't a consequence of the patriarchal tyranny, in fact, even get bigger when you reduce the tyrannical aspect of the patriarch and even the patriarchal aspect to it, then it makes that theory not only wrong, but opposite of the truth, which is the worst kind of wrong. And so, if men are more likely to pursue careers in the STEM fields, which seems to be the case, under conditions of optimal freedom for men and women, then that's going to drive income disparities, because the STEM fields pay more. And they pay more partly because they're scalable. like it's really hard to scale care for people. You know, like if you work in a daycare, you're going to care for 3 infants. You're not going to care for 50 because you can't. It's not scalable. But if you're like a software designer, it's infinitely scalable. And so there's a much wider range of possibility for generating much larger income pools and much larger pools of wealth. You know, and men are also more likely to work longer hours. If you work 10% longer hours, you make 40% more money. There's a nonlinear return on. That's a good thing for everybody who's listening to know. If you have a job, you want to be the guy or the woman who's working that extra 10% because the return on that is nonlinear. So that's a really useful thing to know. Men are more likely to work outside. They're more likely to work in dangerous businesses. They're more likely to run full-time businesses rather than part-time businesses. And they're more likely to move in pursuit of their career goals. And that all contributes to differences in among Uber drivers, they make 7% more money because they drive faster. So anyways,
That's not good though.
No, but it's a high risk. It's a high risk, high return issue, right?
It's a pattern male.
It's more risk. There's more risk in it, so there's more return as long as you don't get hurt.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty common male pattern. Is there's more risk, there's more return as long as you don't get hurt.
The problem seems to be when discussing these things in any way romanticizing or glorifying male behavior or putting any emphasis whatsoever on there being a positive aspect to a lot of the things that we think of as being negative, like aggression or ambition or competition. And competition amongst men is fine. Yeah. Competition with men against women is often thought of as cruel.
Yeah, well, yes, well, and there's a certain amount of reason for that as well, because obviously physical competition it's easy for that to border on cruel.
This is why we were talking before the show that instead of calling people men and women when referring to because there's this very disturbing, in my opinion, trend of transgender women entering into these competitions now with women who are biologically female and dominating them. Yeah. And that instead of calling people men and women, let's dispense with that.
Yeah, you can be a man or a woman. You can be a man or a woman. That's your choice, and you can change it whenever you want. So you're a man or a woman, and that's your choice. But we're going to have a new rule, which is that if you have an XY chromosome, so you're an XY person or an XX person, then if you're an XY person, you don't get to engage in physical combat with an XY person.
Yes.
Men or women.
An XX person.
Doesn't matter.
Yes.
Yeah. How would that be?
If you're XY, you can't engage in physical combat with XX.
That's right. XYs cannot hit XXs. How's that? And maybe they can't run in running contests against them, and maybe they can't play tennis against them. Not within... And maybe that's just reasonable. Right?
It is reasonable.
Yes, it is certainly reasonable.
It is reasonable, but if you talk about that, especially someone like you who you were against this bill that was going to enforce these pronouns and compelling the use of these pronouns, that you're thought to be a transphobic person because you feel like there maybe should be some rational discussion about the physical limitations of certain body structures, because that's what it is. If you're talking about my field of business, you're talking about combat sports.
Right.
I've been involved in combat sports my whole life, and there is a difference. And it's not to say that females aren't competent. And I mean, I had Miriam Nakamoto on yesterday. She's a good friend of mine. She's an 8-time world Muay Thai champion. I mean, she's a monster. But she doesn't fight against men, and she shouldn't fight against men, although she probably could beat a bunch of them.
Right.
It's not. She shouldn't have to. And she's
a tough woman can beat a variety of men.
Oh, yes.
But a really tough man can beat all women.
Yes.
Right. So that's the problem.
That's the reality.
Yes, that is definitely the reality.
You know, and people don't like to hear these things, and they want to pretend that you can even out the playing field with hormones. No, you can even it a little. There's certain things, like I've always said, if you gave Brock Lesnar a sex change and put him in a dress, he's going to run through every woman that's ever lived in the history of women. There's not a single woman that's going to be able to deal with that bone structure and that mind that guy has had with testosterone pumping through it for 39 years. It's just preposterous that we even have to have the discussion. It's so absolutely ridiculous.
It's
the one thing that I was attacked on more than anything in my entire life is saying that I think it's ridiculous to have a trans woman compete against women in mixed martial arts. I was like, you want to have them do it in chess? You want to have them do it in something that's non-physical? Sure. You want them to be a woman? Yes, okay. You want them to be recognized as a woman? You sure. But as soon as you're compelling people, like here's one that's going up lately. If you don't want to date a trans woman, then you are some sort of a bigot. That if you're a man, even if you want a family.
You remember in Brave New World, in Huxley's book, it was considered immoral to reject anyone's sexual advances because it was prejudicial.
Oh, yes.
And the thing is, it is prejudicial. That's the thing. Now, see, so that makes the question even more interesting, because the question is, at what point do you have the right to your prejudices?
Right.
And one of the things that we seem to cling to, and I would say rightly, is that we're allowed to be prejudiced when it comes to who we interact with sexually, and who we choose as friends, and that's right. That's the right to association. And you say,
but
well,
only up to a certain point.
Well,
this is because this new logic is kind of leaking into even sexual preference now. Like if you have a problem with someone being overweight, then you're a sizeist or something like that. Like, what is that?
Well, the thing is that you can't have preferences without having prejudices.
Of course, yeah.
Right, and so that's a big issue. So what does that mean? You don't get to have any preferences? How's that going to work out?
In terms of like what you like to eat, or what kind of films you enjoy, or what kind of books you read, you're allowed to have these preferences. But when it comes to what you're sexually attracted to, there's new emphasis now on trying to draw that line. And say, like, wait, but it's preposterous people that are pushing this, and almost everybody's pushing back. But I find it interesting when these things come up.
It's a logical conclusion to all these other things that have been happening, because that is where the rubber hits the road. It's like, I've seen this in debates that I've had publicly, where people, talk about prejudice, and I've pointed out to them that they have prejudicial attitudes with regards to their sexual preferences because they don't just sleep with anyone who asks them.
Right.
So it's like, well, how is that not a prejudice? Well, of course it's a prejudice. Well, then the question is, under what circumstances are prejudices justifiable? And that's a conversation we don't like to have, because we believe that there are no circumstances whatsoever under which prejudices are acceptable.
There's a big difference between prejudices and discrimination. I think those two get conflated.
Yes, there is a big difference between prejudice and discrimination.
Right.
And also, hopefully discrimination has to do with setting your standards in relationship to the task at hand.
Yes.
Right? That's what you'd hope for. That's the appropriate form of discrimination.
Right.
That's like intelligence.
Sure.
Everything isn't the same about everything all the time. So you discriminate, you rank order things, and you need to rank order them even to pursue things that are valuable. This is one of the problems with the people who are so anti-hierarchy, like the radical leftists. Well, there shouldn't be hierarchies. It's like, okay, then why do something?
Well, that argument is so foolhardy that it's difficult to take seriously, but you do have to engage in it. And I think when you engage in it, it's really fascinating to watch, because it's like you're playing a game of chess with someone who only has a couple of pieces. They have this strong move that they do, but you've got all these other pieces, and you're like, well, let's just keep this game going until. There's hierarchies all throughout nature. It doesn't mean people should suppress people. It doesn't mean people shouldn't have rights. It doesn't mean people should enforce themselves or force themselves on other folks. That's not what it means.
It also doesn't mean that the hierarchies, especially if they're human hierarchies, or that they're only, that's right, not that they're good necessarily, or that they're predicated on power. Like one of the most pathological elements of the postmodern types, especially people like Foucault, is their insistence that all hierarchical structures are predicated on power, and that there's nothing other than power. And that's completely preposterous. I mean, I use examples of plumbers in my lectures more recently because it's rather comical. It's like, well, on what basis do you hire a plumber? So imagine that there's a hierarchy of plumbers ranging from very successful to very unsuccessful. Okay, and you say, well, what makes plumbers successful? Well, the power theory would imply that there are roving bands of mafioso plumbers who like come pounding on your door at 3 a.m. and tell you that if you don't get their particular posse to fix your pipes leaking or not, that they're going to come and burn down your house. Of course, it's completely absurd. When you go to hire someone like a plumber, well, the first thing you want to know is reputation. Can they actually fix a pipe? Because you actually want your pipe fixed. And then you want to know, well, do they deal with you fairly? And part of what's tangled up in that, in all likelihood, is do they deal with their employees fairly? Because that's going to make their business function properly. And so the hierarchy of plumbers, which is part of the patriarchal tyranny, is almost entirely predicated on competence.
Yes.
And almost every enterprise in the West is like that. Because I keep wondering, well, where the hell is this patriarchal tyranny? Like, is it massage therapists? Is it nurses? Like, most nurses are female. If you get females organized into a hierarchy, which you do in nursing, is that all of a sudden, is that part of the patriarchal tyranny? Or is it the fact that now all those people are women? Does that mean it's no longer, well, it's still a hierarchy? Is it no longer a tyranny? Is it no longer patriarchal? Like, is it patriarchal only because there's men in it, or is it patriarchal because it's a hierarchy? All this stuff is so incoherent that it just, all you have to do is think about it, and that hasn't been done to any great degree, and it just dissolves in your hands.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Is that if you're entering into a job straight out of college, you leave university, and now you're entering into your first year in the workplace. It's just a natural fact of life that there's going to be people that are further ahead in this race than you.
Because they're better at what they do.
They're
some of them,
better at it,
because
they have more experience,
and
they have
some
more
it might be
education.
some of them are more crooked and sneaky too.
That's possible as
well, because
but it's the agreeing, everyone agreeing that this is a game.
Yes.
This is some sort of a competition.
Yes.
And you're going to have hierarchies and competitions. You're going to have
Yes.
people who win. You're going to have people who do better.
Yes. No matter what
Right.
well, that's the fundamental issue. As soon as so we could look at it this way. As soon as let's assume people have problems. Everybody can agree on that. And then we could assume that people would like solutions to those problems. So we could agree on that. Then we could say, well, then if you implement a solution socially, so with other people, then you're going to cooperate and compete in relationship to the solution. And that's instantly going to produce a hierarchy. Because no matter what the problem is, some people are going to be better at solving it than others. And then if you have any sense, you put the people who are good at solving it at the forefront, because then they solve it faster and cheaper and better. And then everybody benefits. But then you get a hierarchy.
Right. The people who solve those problems get financial incentive to solve those problems.
Yes, and they do that because the rest of us are greedy and desperate. It's like, we want the people who are good at solving the problems to keep solving them, and so what we're trying to do is to reward them so that they'll keep doing it even if it's difficult.
Yes.
To
and
give them some status.
Them extraordinarily.
If necessary.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, when you look at the people that are the head of giant industry, the CEOs of super successful companies, they're the ones who have the giant yachts and the big houses, and this is the incentive for people to try to get to that position. And the idea that there's no incentive and that there should be no incentive, but yet you're still going to have all this innovation is ridiculous. It's not how it works. It's not how human beings work. If human beings are going to work really hard, there has to be some sort of a reward, and it can't be an equal reward.
Yes, and then what you could say, so the right, that would be, roughly speaking, a conservative position. And then you can take a left-wing position that's reasonable, and you can say, yes, there are hierarchies, but we have to stay awake because they can degenerate into power-hungry tyrannies.
Yes.
So that it's no longer competence. It's political machination and game playing and tyranny that produce the positional differentiation.
Right.
So we got to stay awake to that, and so we got to criticize the hierarchies, not the fact of hierarchy, but the structure of hierarchy, so they stay honest. And then we also have to be careful, because when you do set up a hierarchy, then a lot of people collect at the bottom. That's the necessary consequence of a few people collecting at the top. And so then you have to be concerned about those people at the bottom. And so there's a variety of things that you would do to express that concern. Is one, you might want to have a lot of hierarchies so that people of different talents could play different games. And a complex society is pretty good at that. But you're still going to have people who stack up at the bottom of all hierarchies, right? And those are going to be people who are sick, mentally and physically, and maybe people who are cognitively impaired, or who've experienced some kind of catastrophe in their life. And then you want to set up your system so that those people don't suffer unduly, partly because that's bad and partly because that destabilizes your whole society. And so you could say, well, that's the left's place, is to speak on behalf of the unjustly dispossessed. And the right's position is to stabilize and maintain functional hierarchies.
And encourage competition.
And encourage competition that's of benefit to the whole.
Yes.
And to the individuals within the competition. And then the political dialogue is a continual discussion between the left and the right, saying, well, this hierarchy's getting a little too steep and a little too rigid, and that's, for me, that's also the fundamental reason for the necessity of free speech. It's because
that's the only way to discuss this.
It's the only way of working it out. Yeah. And it is the case. You're going to produce hierarchies. If you're going to pursue things of value socially, you're going to produce hierarchies. And they're necessary.
And there's also, I have a giant issue with the concept that these things are mutually exclusive, that you can't have competition and also have a good social environment. I think that's ridiculous.
That's a preposterous idea. I mean, one of the things I really like about the psychologist Jean Piaget, who's, I would say, the world's foremost expert on games, is that he did a very careful analysis of, say, competitive games. Okay, so let's take hockey or soccer. Doesn't matter. Same example. Okay, you say, well, because people now, they have kids play these games and don't keep score, which of course the kids keep score because they're not stupid like the adults. But, well, we can't have it be competitive. Okay, so let's take it apart. It's like, well, is hockey a competitive game or a cooperative game? Okay, well, so first of all, everyone's trying to do the same thing. That's cooperative. It's not like half the people are playing chess and another, a third of them brought a basketball and two of them are boxing in well, sometimes they do in hockey, boxing in a corner, but everyone's trying to do the same thing. So that's cooperative. Okay, everyone plays their position. That's cooperative. They all follow the same rules. That's cooperative, right? So there's competition, but it's nested inside a fundamental structure of cooperation. And the cooperation is the basis of the game itself. Let's all arbitrarily agree that it's important to put this black disc in the net, which is to get your aim right. And then let's cooperate within our teams to do that, because we're going to pass and we're going to pass to each other. And we're also going to work so that each of us is a good player, but so that we all work for the betterment of our team, because we want to win games across multiple games. So that's also cooperative. And then you want to interact with your enemies, let's say, the other team, in a way that's indicative of good sportsmanship so that the entire league can flourish. And to think of that as competitive is absolutely, it's so, there's no other way of describing it than stupid. That's what it is. It's an ignorant unidimensional analysis. It's put forward by someone who's reflexively opposed to anything that smacks of competition and who isn't thinking it through at all.
They're denying the benefits of competition and the fact that they reap those very benefits of competition by enjoying the products that are created by these corporations.
Yes. Well,
it's very hypocritical.
And well, that's for sure. That's called a performative contradiction. It's like, well, I like to complain about left-wing issues on my iPhone.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, well, yeah, fair enough, but you should have a little gratitude for the fact that you've got your iPhone to complain about. And those organizations, those corporations are unbelievably competitive, and they fall apart almost instantly when that competition stops being an issue, because then there's no constraint on the behavior of the system. So, yes, and the issue with men, I think, with young men, and this is one of the things I've been trying to address, is that if your fundamental presupposition is that our culture is a patriarchal tyranny, which is an appalling presupposition, along with the idea that the best way of looking at history is that it was the oppression, the continual oppression of women by men, which is also something that I regard as an absolutely reprehensible doctrine, then, okay, so it's a patriarchal tyranny.
But that, in their defense, that did exist. There has been continual oppression of women. It's just not the only thing that's happened. Well, there's been women that have been revered. There's been women that have been celebrated. There's been women that have accomplished great things, but there's been a lot of oppression. So if they concentrate primarily on that oppression, and that's their main point of study, and that's the thing they want to talk about all the time, they kind of have a point in the fact that if you're looking at all the events that have ever taken place, there's a significant number of them that have been women being oppressed.
But I don't know if there's more women who've been oppressed than men who've been oppressed.
That's a very good point.
So I would say that the entire history you look at it this way, is that we oppress ourselves personally with our own malevolence and stupidity. And then we're all oppressed by the kind of the crushing hand of the social world that molds us in one way and not in another. And then, of course, nature is doing her best all the time to give birth to us, but also to kill us and take us out. And so there's this endless, what would you call it, vulnerability that characterizes our existence psychologically and socially and naturally. And I would say 150 years ago, that was even more intense than it was now, because the typical person in the West lived on less than $1 a day before 1895. And so the way I think that we should view the history of the world is that men and women labored under virtually impossible conditions for the entire bulk of human evolution. And they did their best to cooperate and to compete, but to cooperate so that they had some possibility of a modicum of security and satisfaction, and that's the right framework. And then within that, of course, there's power games that are played by people who are corrupt.
Yeah, within that, there's horrible events, there's terrible things that have taken place, but there's a massive amount of hypocritical thinking when you are criticizing the actions of so many people and talking about how many people are complicit in these things, while you're carrying around a phone that's made by someone who gets $1 a day.
I was talking to a journalist in Slovenia who is a lefty and not a very sophisticated one, and she was talking about the 1%. And I said, well, do you know that if you make more than $32,000 a year that you're part of the 1%? She said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, that's the worldwide statistic. It's like, so you're part of the 1%. Well, she didn't. First of all, she said, well, I don't believe that statistic. And I thought, well, that's fine. You can go look it up yourself. But what was so interesting was that for her, that characterization, the 1% victimizers, was only relevant within the confines of her national border. Right. As soon as I said, well, no, it's all you have to do is expand that out a little bit and you're the problem and not the solution, then that was completely untenable for her.
Exactly.
She couldn't include herself in the population of victimizers, even though, she lives in a Western country and she's a well-paid journalist and she lives a very privileged life, so to speak, by historical and world standards. In comparison
to someone living in the Congo or something.
Well, or anybody living Guatemala, anywhere in the entire history of the human race.
Right. Up until now. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If you make $34,000 today, you absolutely are in the top 1% of everybody who's ever lived.
Oh, definitely. Well, of course.
Ever.
Yes, definitely. Especially given what you can buy with it.
The only reason to deny that is because it doesn't fit what you've come into the argument with. It doesn't fit your predisposed notion that you have. Your idea that it's so rigid. This idea that you are not one of the ones that's oppressing.
That's right. That's
Even
exactly
though you're carrying that iPhone with that laptop and all these different things that you enjoy that are created by these corporations that you support them financially, but yet they're the ones that are destroying this earth. These are the ones that you're rallying against. These are the ones that you hate against.
Yeah, well, the victim-victimizer narrative only works if you assume that you're a victim.
Right.
And as soon as you assume that you're a victimizer, well, then it's not so much fun. One of the things, I wrote the foreword for the new version of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, the abridged version. It came out November 1st. And I was trying to figure out why the Russian Revolution went wrong so rapidly. Because it went wrong right from the beginning. And Solzhenitsyn quotes this guy named, I think his name was Walter Latsis, if I remember correctly. I got the Latsis part right anyways. And he said, when you're interrogating a member of the bourgeoisie to decide whether they constitute an enemy of the state, you don't give any credibility to such niceties as individual guilt or innocence. All you care about is their group and their background and their economic status. And if they're in the wrong group, the bourgeoisie, then that's it. That's the end of them. And Solzhenitsyn comments not just the end of them, but the end of their children and their grandchildren as well. And Latsis was eventually executed by Stalin. Somebody wrote me and just told me that after I wrote the foreword. But one of the things I figured out was this, and this is really worth thinking about, man. So the intersectional claim is that each person has more than one group identity. So fundamentally, if you're going to calculate their victim status, then you have to calculate it across all the different groups that they might be victims in. And so, maybe, who knows, a Native American is one form of victim in this line of thinking, but a Native American victim is female is like twice the victim, or however you would calculate that mathematically. It's like, okay, and maybe you can be put into 6 different groups. We already talked about that a little bit. But here's the bloody rub. If I put you in 6 groups, in one of those groups you're a victimizer. You can bloody well bet on it. And then here's the next rule. If you're a victimizer among any possible dimension of analysis, then it's the gulag for you. And so that's the fundamental danger of that group identity, victimizer, victim narrative, is that you fragment your identity in multiple dimensions. You'll find out that you're a victimizer, and then everyone's a criminal, and then everyone's guilty. That's exactly what happened in Russia. And then you think, well, wait a minute, there were a bunch of people who were really compassionate about the poor. It's like, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that at the beginning of the Russian Revolution, that 20% of the communists were really concerned about the poor. Maybe we could say 50%, just to be arbitrary about it. The other 50% were jealous and resentful about anyone who had anything more than they did. All right, now that you put those two groups head to head in a battle for 4 years and see who's standing at the end. Even if you are one of those utopians who actually cares for the dispossessed, when the revolution comes, you can bloody well be sure that your head's going to be first on the chopping block. Because the people who are motivated by hate are going to be a lot more vicious in their attempts to eradicate than you're going to be, what would you call it, effective in your attempts to save. That whole game, that whole identity politics game, that is dangerous beyond belief. And it's predicated fundamentally on resentment and the desire to devolve people back into a tribal antagonism.
I think it's so important that you talk about it this way. And I think it's really interesting when I see the resistance to you talking about it this way and how many people are unwilling to look at it as this multi-level historical sort of record. You could look and see how this played out, and you can look and see what's going on right now with these control games that people are playing socially, and that they are enforcing certain types of behavior.
Really was the most famous man no one's ever heard of.
Now, we're not going to identify this contestant panel because to identify him would be to tip off his secret. We will call him simply Dr. X. Now, Doctor, if you will whisper your secret to me, we will show it at the same time to the folks out there.
I invented electronic television.
Is this some kind of a machine that might be painful when it's used?
Yeah, sometimes it's most painful.
This is the famous Dr. Philo T. Farnsworth, who invented electronic television. And, sir, how old were you when you invented television, or the first television machine as we know it today, first television system?
I was 14.
14 years.
It's hard to imagine the world my great-grandfather was born into in 1906. No computers, no cell phones, no cars, no airplanes, and certainly no television. When he was growing up in a log cabin in rural Utah, his primetime entertainment was staring at the moon and dreaming of the future.
The moon!
An electric generator and a stack of science fiction magazines fueled young Philo's imagination. Then, in 1920, at the age of 14, while harrowing a field behind a team of horses, he had a revelation. If he could train an electron to do what horses were doing and go to the end of a row, turn around, and start over, he could send pictures through the air. The next year he entered high school, and he tried to talk his way into a senior science class by describing his dream of an all-electronic television. His teacher had no idea what he was talking about, but agreed to tutor him and saved the very first drawing of a television camera. By 19, Phil had attracted investors, built a lab in San Francisco, and proposed to his sweetheart, Elma.
He says, there's another woman in my life. Well, before I could faint, he said, and her name is television. The only way I see that we would have as much time together as I'd like is if you work with me. How about it?
On September 7th, 1927, with my great-grandma at his side taking notes, Philo successfully transmitted an electronic image for the first time.
I was so excited, I was dancing around, and Phil was, I knew from the shaking hands that he was very emotionally impacted, but he said, well, there you've got television. That was what he said. The backers said, Farnsworth, when are we going to see some money in this thing? Phil had painted a dollar sign on the slide, and that's the first thing they saw, was a dollar sign.
By 1934, he was ready to demonstrate television for the first time. Philadelphia's Franklin Institute was overflowing with people wanting to see his new miracle. Although the screen was only about a foot in diameter, the crowds were transfixed and refused to leave.
We didn't realize how hard it was to keep live pictures going on television yet. We had everything from trained dogs and bears, ventriloquists and puppet shows. And there was one clear night, a full moon, and Phil turned it on the moon. And that got more of a response from the public than anything.
Fucking moon again!
The moon sits for its first portrait.
Take a picture of the moon above. In May
The moon first radio snapshot.
morning
Moon makes
night.
television debut in post for radio
Light
snapshot.
of the same. Oh. Take a picture of the moon on high when it.
Popular Science presents a backstage preview of television, the newest miracle of modern electrical engineering. Technicians in the Farnsworth, Philadelphia laboratories have helped to make television, the dazzling dream of the decade, a practical reality today. Mr. Philo T. Farnsworth, shown at the right, is working on the image dissector tube, a photoelectric camera tube of his own invention that distinguishes his system of television from others. It is said to be responsible for the most clearly defined television pictures. Placed in the circuit of this receiving system is a funnel-shaped cathode tube. The round, flat surface of its bulb becomes the picture screen in studio monitor sets, as well as in home receiving sets. The image dissector tube and the cathode oscillite tube are the heart and brain of the Farnsworth system. Television engineers are now adjusting studio equipment to demonstrate the technical routine of broadcasting a television program. Max Factor Jr. has developed a new type makeup for television photography. The photoelectronic camera, being supersensitive to red, causes that color to be absorbed. Thus, red is applied to hollows and depressions of the face to eliminate heavy lines and also to produce highlights. While blue, which reproduces darkly, is used as eyeshadow. The facial makeup of the modern movie queen makes her a dream of loveliness, but the television star has the grotesque appearance of a circus clown. The new television makeup may give the camera a break, but the wearer's first view of herself is likely to break her heart, unless she has a sense of humor.
What the fuck?
Take a picture of the moon above in May or June. Then you can make a love morning, night, or noon. By the light of the same. Oh. Take a picture of the moon on high when it.
Popular Science presents a backstage preview of television, the newest miracle of modern electrical engineering. Technicians in the Farnsworth, Philadelphia laboratories have helped to make television, the dazzling dream of the decade, a practical reality today. Mr. Philo T. Farnsworth, shown at the right, is working on the image dissector tube, a photoelectric camera tube of his own invention that distinguishes his system of television from others. It is said to be responsible for the most clearly defined television pictures. Placed in the circuit of this receiving system is a funnel-shaped cathode tube. The round, flat surface of its bulb becomes the picture screen in studio monitor sets, as well as in home receiving sets. The image dissector tube and the cathode oscillite tube are the heart and brain of the Farnsworth system. Television engineers are now adjusting studio equipment to demonstrate the technical routine of broadcasting a television program. Max Factor Jr. has developed a new type makeup for television photography. The photoelectronic camera, being supersensitive to red, causes that color to be absorbed. Thus, red is applied to hollows and depressions of the face to eliminate heavy lines and also to produce highlights. While blue, which reproduces darkly, is used as eyeshadow. The facial makeup of the modern movie queen makes her a dream of loveliness, but the television star has the grotesque appearance of a circus clown. The new television makeup may give the camera a break, but the wearer's first view of herself is likely to break her heart, unless she has a sense of humor. In this camera is an image dissector tube. The camera lens picks up the artist as an image of light, causing electrodes in the dissector tube to emit electrons. Passing through station equipment, the electrons become radio impulses to be broadcast and picked up by receiving sets, where the routine is reversed. the radio impulses becoming points of light that appear on the screen as pictures. 30 pictures are completed every second. These pictures are composed of 200,000 light points that strike the screen one at a time at the rate of 6 million points per second. Music and sound accompany the performer's action, both visible and audible elements going on the air in perfect synchronization. As the action is photographed from various angles, engineers at control boards select long shots and close-ups, editing the show as it passes instantly through the station's facility. Traveling with the speed of light through a maze of tubes and equipment, the show leaves the station's sending towers to be viewed by the television public, an audience as yet small and comparatively ignorant of the enormous research and experiment that makes it possible for us to see and hear people many miles away. The most fanciful dream of mankind is today a startling reality, destined to become the world's most popular science.
The RCA said no person, no boy of 15 could come up with that complicated concept. So Phil went to the patent office and he said, we need a ruling on this. They asked Phil if he had told anyone about his television ideas. Phil's old chemistry teacher, Justin Tolman, produced a page of Phil's notebook where Phil had made a drawing of the camera tube. And so RCA had to give in on that idea. Therefore, they made a ruling that Farnsworth was the original inventor of electronic television. He said this is the first time RCA has ever taken a license.
This would be the place for a happy ending, except for a tragic twist of fate. By the time a TV standard was finally agreed on, the world